What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto and Hana arranged marriage? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. The night sky was lit up with the light of the moon and stars as they shone down onto the hidden shinobi village Konohagakure, the village hidden in the leaves. Lights glowed along the streets and the sounds of both civilians and shinobi as they celebrated the graduation of their children from the ninja academy and their new rank as genin. The streets, while normally empty at this time, were filled with people going from one shop to another. Children ran through the streets taking advantage of this chance to play and stay up past their bedtimes. Sitting inside one of the food shops Ichiraku Ramen was a young blonde boy with whisker marks in a "Kill me" orange jumpsuit and wearing a forehead protector with a leaf shape carved onto it. Next to him was a man in a chunin uniform and a similar forehead protector with brown hair tied in a ponytail and a scar across his nose and dark eyes that could be either black or brown depending on the light. The young boy, Naruto, was eating his bowl of ramen at a slow pace as his mind went over the information he had gained not even 1 hour ago. Flashback. Naruto stood the scroll tied to his back, panting, exhausted from his training and from being pushed aside by Iruka-sensei to protect him from the barrage of kunis that had been thrown at him. He looked over at his sensei, surprise filtering across his eyes as he watched the man slouch against the shack's wall. Above them both stood the man who had told Naruto to take the scroll and who had thrown the kunis at him, Mizuki-sensei. Mizuki stood on the tree branch smirking down at Naruto and Iruka, his eyes cold and hard. Naruto stiffened as he gazed at the eyes that had haunted him all his life. Those eyes. Those are their eyes. The eyes the villagers get when they attack me. He gazed at Mizuki, his own eyes narrowing. Mizuki-sensei, what's going on here? Why did you attack me and Iruka-nichan? Mizuki's smirk grew into a smile that sent a shiver down Naruto's spine. Because he was in my way and because I've wanted to kill you for a long time, demon. Naruto's eyes narrowed and his mouth formed into a scowl. Why do you people always call me that? What did I ever do to you? Mizuki smiled and went to speak when Iruka shouted. Don't, Miyuki, it's forbidden. The third made that law for a reason. Naruto turned to his brother figure and stared in shock. Nichan, what are you talking about? What law? Iruka looked at him, sadness in his eyes. I'm forbidden from telling you, Naruto. Only the third can do that. I am sorry. Naruto went to speak when Mizuki started to laugh above them. Sorry. You're not sorry, Iruka. You want this demon dead even more than I do. After all, he's the reason your parents are dead. Naruto stared up at Mizuki, fear and also curiosity in his eyes. Iruka glared at Mizuki. No, he's not. He growled out, defending the blonde kid he saw as a little brother. Mizuki just scoffed and looked at Naruto. You want to know the truth, kid? Naruto nodded his head slightly, still hesitant to know what made the village hate him. Mizuki crouched down, getting more relaxed as he looked at Naruto. Guess it's only fair I tell you why I'm going to kill you. He scoffed. You remember how the Yondaime killed the 9-tailed fox, the Kyuubi no Kitsune? He asked. Naruto nodded. Well, in truth he didn't kill the fox. He couldn't, as the fox is one of the Biju, one of 9-tailed demon lords and the strongest of them all. He smirked down at the boy as he began telling him the reason for his village's hatred of him. So in order to save the village he decided to seal the fox within the body of a newborn child. Naruto's eyes widened. He knew suddenly what Mizuki was going to say next, and as Mizuki spoke his fears were confirmed. Yes, Naruto, that child was you. The Kyuubi was sealed within you. You are the 9-tailed fox. Naruto stood paralyzed, looking up at the man before him. Out of the corner of his eyes he saw Iruka's head slung down and tears streamed down his eyes. Naruto was so distracted that he missed Mizuki standing up and grabbing one of the 2 large shuriken on his back and throwing it at him. Iruka hadn't, though. For the second time that night Naruto was thrown down and Iruka took the attack for him. Naruto stared up at the man he considered an older brother. Why? He asked quietly to the man. Iruka smiled at him. Because oh Tuto, I was just like you at one time. After the fox killed my family I was always in pain, always alone. Then when you came to my class I saw myself. I saw the pain you went through. I never saw you as the fox, and I honestly don't think the fox would have attacked us without a reason. I only saw Naruto Uzumaki my oh Tuto. Naruto closed his eyes and let a few tears fall before he smiled at Iruka. A smile that the village had come to call his fox smile, before turning and running into the forest. End flashback. Naruto's mind was so caught up in his thoughts he had missed Iruka talking to him and only became aware when Iruka lightly touched his shoulder. "Naruto, are you alright?" he asked. Naruto blinked and looked up at the man before chuckling and rubbing the back of his head. "Yeah, sorry Ni-chan. Just thinking about some things." Iruka nodded and sighed. He looked at Naruto, think over something before nodding and standing up. "Hey Naruto, I need to go and talk to the third. Tell him what happened and everything." Naruto nodded once again, thinking about what he had been told. Iruka looked at him again, his thoughts wandering. He has so few that care about him. Only me, the third, and that Kakashi guy. What he needs is a real friend, and I think he already has one, he just needs to meet him. He smiled and turned to go before turning to look at Naruto once again. "Naruto," he said, his voice serious. Naruto looked up. Iruka rarely talked serious like that. "Yay Ni-chan." Iruka gazed at him for a second before talking. "I know you're thinking about the forest." Naruto flinched at that and nodded. "So when you go home I want you to go ahead and open that scroll on advanced meditation I gave you last year." Naruto stared up and blinked. The scroll Iruka had mentioned had been one of two that he had given Naruto on the boy's 12th birthday. They were scrolls on meditation, something that Naruto had discovered helped him deal with the stress of the village. Iruka had made Naruto promise not to open the advanced scroll until he said it was okay to do so. Naruto had kept his word as he didn't want to betray his Ni-chan's trust. "Really, are you sure I'm ready?" Iruka smiled and nodded. "Yeah, I think it's time you learned something new." Naruto smiled and nodded, his excitement distracting him from his thoughts. "Okay, as soon as I get home I will open it." Iruka nodded and smiled. "Good, then I will see you in a few days for team placement," he said as he walked off waving his hand. Naruto waved back, a large smile on his face. "Okay Iruka Nichan, see you in a few days." He smiled and finished his ramen quickly before jumping up and running off, calling, "Thanks Ayame Onisan, thanks Tuchi-sama," over his shoulder. A quick, "You're welcome Naruto-kun, chan," was the reply from the father-daughter pair that ran the store. Naruto walked down the streets, his face in a slight smile at Iruka's words and his eyes shining at the prospect of learning a new meditation technique. As he walked he spotted 3 kids from his class walking towards him. All 3 wore their new Konoha forehead protector, though in different places. The 3 were Ino Yamanaka, a faded blonde kunoichi who wore a short purple vest-like blouse with a raised collar, a purple apron skirt that is cut off on the sides, and bandages on her stomach and legs. She also wore purple and white elbow warmers. Her protector was worn around her waist like a belt. Next was Choji Akamichi. He wore black shorts, a long white scarf, a short-sleeved, blue haori, over a white shirt with his clan's obligatory kanji for food on it, small, hoop earrings, and his legs and forearms were wrapped in bandages. His forehead protector was styled in a manner that allowed 2 tufts of hair to poke out at each side. The final person was one of Naruto's few friends from his class, Shikamaru Nara. His attire was rather plain, consisting of a green-lined mesh t-shirt under a short-sleeved gray jacket with green edges, adorned on both the sleeves and the back with a circle with a line through it, his blue forehead protector worn around his left arm, brown pants, and blue sandals. As the trio approached him they suddenly recognized him, and both Choji's and Shikamaru's faces turned into smiles, while Ino developed a frown and a look of disgust. Naruto walked up to them hoping to talk to the 2 he considered friends when Ino noticed the forehead protector around his forehead. "Naruto Yubaka, why do you have a Konoha protector when you didn't graduate?" she yelled as her head grew 3 times its normal size. Naruto flinched away, something that Shikamaru noticed, and narrowed his eyes at marking it for later. Naruto looked at Ino, his eyes cold as he glared at the kunoichi. "Iruka-sensei gave it to me when I explained to him I'm unable to perform the basic bunshin technique, but I can perform a more advanced technique." Ino scoffed and looked unbelieving. "Yeah right, like you could ever perform a more advanced technique. Did you forget you're the class doob? The dumbest out of all of us." Naruto glared at her, his fists clenched. Suddenly he raised then and performing a quick series of hand seals ending on the tiger seal before quietly saying, "Kage bunshin no jutsu." Suddenly, after 6 puffs of smoke, 6 more Narutos stood surrounding the Ino Shikacho trio. Ino stared in shock as she looked at the clones around her. H. How? You can't even pass your test. How can you perform this? Shikamaru scoffed and looked at her. Really, Ino? You're so troublesome. He looked at Naruto and smiled, a genuine one that few ever saw on his face except when he was cloud watching. So finally figured out a solution to your chakra supply problem, huh? Naruto chuckled and laughed. Yep. Shadow clones. They take even more chakra than a regular Bushin, so I don't have to worry about using too much chakra. Now I just have to perfect it. So I can summon one at a time. Right now this is my minimum. Ino stared in shock as Shikamaru nodded. Nice. Naruto smiled and formed the tiger seal again, dispelling the clones. As they dispelled, Naruto got their memories back and suddenly he got a thoughtful face. Ino, since when do you have a tattoo on your back? Ino's eyes opened wide. What, how? Naruto looked at her. When I dispel my clones I get their memories. One was behind you and saw the tattoo. The kanji for soul, I believe. Ino nodded, her mind trying to wrap around the thought of Naruto actually being smart and not as lazy as Shikamaru or as dumb as the pink banshee Sakura. Naruto laughed and looked at Shikamaru. Well, I got to go. Iruka said I can finally look at the advanced meditation scroll, so I am gonna go start on that. Maybe we can meet up tomorrow for a game. Shikamaru nodded and agreed before Naruto and the tri went their separate ways. Naruto to his apartment and the trio to a nearby restaurant. As the trio left, Ino looked back around to see Naruto walking with his hands in his pockets and slightly hunched over. Her old opinion of Naruto now fading as he walked off. Who are you, Naruto Uzumaki? As he walked away from them, Naruto didn't know that he was being watched through a crystal by an old man who had a kind and grandfatherly smile on his face as he watched the young man he considered a grandson. Naruto walked into his apartment, closing and locking the door behind him as he entered. Sighing, he walked into the kitchen and pulled a glass out of his cupboard and got himself a glass of water to drink. Turning, he leaned against the counter and closed his eyes. As he drank, he took a deep breath and let his mind relax while still paying attention to his surroundings. He let out a deep sigh and looked around his small apartment. It was small, a total of 3 rooms. The living room, kitchen, the bedroom and then the attached bath. Cracks covered the walls and much of the wallpaper was torn and abused. One of the windows had a hole in it from where a villager had thrown a rock into the place. It was furnished with only a few of the basic furnishings and no decorations. All in all, it was a dump, but it was the only place Naruto had to go. The third had made sure to get it to Naruto to keep him off the streets and into his own home. He had tried to get him one of the ninja orphan apartments, but the council shot him down. As it was, he was barely able to get this place for the boy. Naruto sighed again and put his glass down and walked into his small bedroom. A single bed and a dresser were all that was in there. On top of the dresser was 3 scrolls. 2 were open and 1 was still sealed shut. Naruto threw off his shirt and pants, so he was only in his boxers. His small build and frame suddenly obvious as his malnourished body was shown. He folded his clothes, the only clothes he could afford even if he disliked the color, and placed them in the dresser next to another exact copy outfit. Reaching up to the top of the dresser, he grabbed the unopened scroll and took a seat on the floor. Putting his thumb on the seal, he pushed some chakra into the seal and watched as it disappeared and opened up. Looking at the beginning of the scroll, he blinked in surprise as he saw the name of the information. Advanced Meditation Art. Mindscape entry, Naruto said aloud before reading the scroll. Naruto sat up with a grin on his face as he finished reading. You have to be kidding me. That's all it takes. Huh, I've been able to do that for years. The reason for Naruto's obvious enthusiasm was that he had discovered that in order to enter into his mindscape, all he had to do was enter into his meditation, empty his thoughts, tune out his surroundings, and focus on his own self and feel as if he was sinking into his own mind, or like he was walking through a door. Naruto resealed the scroll and placed it on top of the dresser before resuming his seat on the floor and entering the basic monk pose for meditation. Legs crossed, hands on knees, palms up, back straight and eyes closed. As he began, he felt as if he was sinking into something, and as his thoughts emptied and all sounds and feelings from the outside world disappeared, he let himself fully sink. Suddenly the feel of cold stone under him and the sound of dripping water entered his ears. Opening his eyes, Naruto realized he was in what looked to be a sewer of sorts. Looking down, he saw he was in his kill me orange outfit and he developed a slight twitch in his eyes. Damn it, even here I can't escape this fucking outfit. He growled, not caring what he said as he was in his own mind. With a growl he stood up and looked around. Pipes ran along the walls and ceiling. The floor he was on was solid concrete. Next to that was a canal that was full of what looked to be water, but as Naruto looked closely he saw that it was actually chakra. And the pipes have it as well. He looked at the pipes again and saw that the chakra all ran the same way. All except for one set that flowed in the opposite direction. Frowning, he followed the flow of this chakra, noticing that unlike the others it was red, while the other was a cerulean blue like his eyes. As he walked he realized that the sewer was starting to change into a more cleaner look, and then the sewer was gone and he was standing in a corridor like inside of a palace. Frowning, he followed the corridor down until he came to a set of large red-orange doors with a giant black fox-like face painted on them. Now that's a good shade of orange and it goes amazing with the black, he said to himself. Looking at the handles he saw they were swirls similar to the swirl on the back of his suit but made out of what looked to be foxtails. Frowning, he grabbed the handles and pushed the doors open. Inside was a room that looked plain and bare except for 4 pillars around the room decorated with foxes of all types and a giant cage at its back that had a large seal attached to it. Naruto walked up to the cage and looked up at the seal. It was placed right above a round lock in the shape of a 9-tailed fox. Suddenly Naruto's mind clicked and he looked deeper into the cage. As he did he saw a shadow of a large creature laying towards the back and saw its many tails flowing out behind it. Naruto gazed in slight awe at the beast and then took a step back and sat down on the floor before taking his meditative pose. He felt his mind flow and flux and felt the conscience of the fox, telling him the beast was awake and aware of him. He smiled and continued sitting in that position waiting for the fox to speak. It didn't take long. So you have finally found this place. I wondered how long it would take. Naruto opened his eyes to see a pair of crimson eyes with a slit pupil staring at him from the cage. Unlike the eyes of the villagers though, these eyes were full of kindness and ever some sorrow. This confused Naruto as all he had heard was that the fox is a demon and wanted to kill everyone. I see from your face you wonder why I show now hatred towards you. The voice spoke again. Naruto nodded. The fox sighed and stood up, walking towards the lit part of the cage so Naruto could see it better. Naruto's eyes widened in shock at the sheer size of the beast. It had to at least be as large as the Hokage monument, maybe even larger. Its face was exactly like the one painted on the door's long ears and pointed face. Its upper body was very human-like and its front paws even looked like human hands. The 9-tailed fox laid down and placed its hands on its paws. It gazed at Naruto and spoke with its deep voice. Listen, kid, I hold no hatred for you or even your village or the fourth for sealing me in you. No, you see, I only hold hatred for the one who made me attack the village, the one who unsealed me from my last container. He was an Uchiha, one of the ones that kept their hatred of their Senju relatives. Naruto nodded and the fox continued. No, I do not hate you. But I do hate myself. For because of me you have had to live a life full of hatred and malice. Only a few have shown you kindness and only a few do you name friend. And this is all my fault. Naruto stared unbelieving at the fox. Here was the 9-tailed fox, the lord of demons and master of foxes. The most powerful of the Biju and the destroyer of Konoha, telling him that he was sorry for the way he was treated due to him being sealed into him. As this processed he realized that here was someone that knew his pain and understood it. Someone that may be able to connect with him and befriend him. He smiled and looked at the fox who was eyeing him with curiosity at the smile. It's okay, Kyuubi-san, I'm not mad at you. It's not your foe, the villagers are bakas. The Kyuubi stared in amazement at the boy before it. You do not hate me, kid? Why? It asked. Naruto smiled sadly and looked down. Because you're the only person who could understand me. You're the only one who knows what I've been through completely and understands how it feels. And, he stopped and looked up at the fox, a sad look coming to his eyes. I would like to have a friend who is like that. The Kyuubi's eyes widened at the boy's words and then they softened and began to shine with a kindness that Naruto had never seen. Kid, I would be honored to have you call me friend and to be able to call you friend as well. Naruto smiled and then frowned as he looked at the giant cage. Kyuubi-chan, how can I open this cage for you? You shouldn't be stuck in there and I would like to be able to at least give you a hug. The Kyuubi laughed and looked up at the seal. You need to tear the seal off. But I think the fourth place a protection on it, so be prepared for anything. Naruto nodded and standing up crouched down and after sending chakra to his legs jumped into the air and grabbed the seal. As he dropped he pulled the seal away until it was all gone and there was a sudden flash of golden light. Naruto gasped as he hit the ground and looked up to see a man standing there looking at the Kyuubi with a frown on his face. I am surprised at you, Kyuubi. This is a bit early to be trying to escape, don't you think? The fox smiled and looked at the man. Ah, so it was a chakra memory you placed on the seal. I warned the kid you did something but I didn't know what. He looked at Naruto. Kid, meet the man who sealed me within you and has been your idol for years now. Minato Namikaze, the Yellow Flash and Yondaime Hokage. Naruto stared in amazement as the man turned and smiled at him. Hello Naruto. It has been a long time since I last saw you. You have grown very weak. He stopped and stared forward as his eyes suddenly turned cold. Those ingrates. How dare they? How dare they treat my own son like that? Naruto froze at the man's last words. He stared up at him again. Apart from not having the marks on his cheeks, the man was an older version of Naruto. Why? You're my father? Kyuubi's ears perked at his words and Minato looked at Naruto. You didn't know? He asked. Naruto shook his head and the Kyuubi growled. No, he didn't know and neither did I. The third made a law that forbid anyone from talking about me or his heritage even to him. He never knew who his parents were and never knew why he was hated by most of the village. He growled again, his claws scraping the ground. That is why the kid went to remove the seal. We both wanted to help and comfort each other, and most importantly your son needs a friend that really knows him. You know the real me, Minato. After all, it was his mother that was my last Jinchuriki. He stopped for a moment. And it seems you sealed half of me within you as well. Minato looked at him. Yes, I did. I didn't want him getting killed from the ceiling. And you're right, I do know the real you. Sorry, he looked down. Kyuubi laughed. I hold no anger towards you, Minato, as I told the kid here earlier. No, I only wish to be free of this cage and be a companion for the boy, even if it is only in his mind. And I would like the other half of me back. The kid would have survived a full sealing and I can make sure he doesn't get affected by it either. Minato looked at him and then down at Naruto. Very well, but let me talk to my son first. I want him to sleep when I do that. The Kyuubi nodded and laid his head back down watching the man and his son. Minato walked forward and sat down in front of Naruto smiling as he looked at him. I'm sorry, he said looking at the boy. I should have been there for you and so should have your mother. Both of us wanted to but we couldn't. I died sealing the fox in you and your mother died having him removed from her the way she did. Naruto stared at the man that was his father and also the fourth. Suddenly his eyes lit up and he jumped forward and embraced the man that was his father. I forgive you, Chi-Chi, it's not your fault, you tried to save the village and me. Minato smiled and then embraced his son, tears streaming down his eyes. Thank you, Naruto. Kyuubi smiled and then frowned. I'm sorry, Minato, but your time is almost up. Minato looked at him and nodded. He looked at Naruto. I am sorry, I only had a short time here and I still need to help Kyuubi here. Naruto smiled. It's okay, I understand. I better sleep anyway, I need to talk to Gigi in the morning. Minato smiled and Naruto and him stood up. Naruto went to close his eyes. When Kyuubi spoke up, one last thing, kid. Naruto looked at him. My name is Kurama. Naruto smiled. Thank you, Kurama-san, he said as he closed his eyes and vanished from his mindscape. The sun was just starting to rise when Naruto awoke from his slumber to discover he was laying on the floor in his room. Looking up, he stared at the ceiling as he tried to figure out why he was on the floor when his memory suddenly jolted him awake as last night finally came to light. Kurama, he said quietly as he remembered the fox's name. A sudden chuckle brought his attention to his surroundings as he looked around for the source only to see nothing at all in the way of a person. The chuckle came again and this time Naruto recognized it. Kurama-san? He asked quietly. The chuckle turned into a laugh. Hi kid. It is me. After you fell asleep I was able to form a mental connection so we may speak. But a suggestion out in public or around others, think what you wish to say and I shall hear it. If you speak people will suspect me and try to attack you even more, and now that I am free of the cage, if not the seal, I may not be able to resist punishing them. Naruto nodded and looked out the window. It's starting to brighten. I better get dressed and head over to see Gigi. Kurama agreed and Naruto got up and prepared for the day. When he was ready, Naruto went to leave his home when a poof of smoke shot up in front of him to reveal a small orange toad wearing a green vest sitting on top of a large box. Naruto blinked in surprise before smiling at the toad. "Hey Gamakichi, how's it going?" The toad smiled and waved one hand. "Yo, Naruto, got any candy?" Naruto laughed and tossed to Toad a piece of candy. "So what's Ero Sennin got for me now?" he said with his usual smile. The small toad ate the candy and tapped the box beneath him. "He said it was a graduation gift and that you will really like it." He looked at Naruto and his grin widened. "Also, Pops said to tell you well done on graduating. Your father would be proud." Naruto smiled and looked at the small toad. "Thanks, Kichi. Tell Ero and your Pops thank you and that Yonda is proud of me." He knew that the boss of toads and his godfather would understand the hidden message. The small toad nodded and said he would before disappearing in another poof of smoke. Naruto looked at the box and reached out and opened it. Looking in, he saw three things. One was a large scroll with a kanji on it he couldn't make out. The next was a paper-wrapped package. And the last was a small scroll placed on top of the package. Grabbing the small scroll, he opened it and began to read. "Hey Gaki, long time no see. Sensei told me about your graduation, so I figured some gifts were in order. Hope you like them. Jiraiya." Naruto smiled and looking at the seal on the note. He placed his hand on it and sent some chakra into it. With a quick poof, a large bag appeared in front of him with a kanji for money and a note saying use as you wish. Naruto smiled and put it back in the seal before grabbing the package and opening it. He gasped and smiled as he looked at what was in it. He heard Kurama give a growl of surprise and approval. "Now that is awesome." Situated in the center of the village so that those within could watch everything stood the Hokage Tower. Not only the home but also the office of the Hokage, Fire Shadow, of Konoha. At the top of the tower was an open area that allowed a viewer to watch the entire city and even part of the countryside around it. Standing at this spot was an elderly man with a white goatee and black eyes smoking a pipe. He wore a white robe with a kanji for fire on its back in red. And a red hat with a white diamond that had the same kanji on the front. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage, stood watching his village with a gentle smile. He had long ago learned that to protect and defend this village was his goal in life, and as Hokage he could fulfill that goal to the maximum. The wind kicked up and with it brought the smell of the forest. As he stood there, a man suddenly appeared behind him with silver gravity-defying hair and a dog mask on his face. He stood quietly waiting as the Hokage stood smoking. "What may I do for you, dog?" the third asked. The man, dog, bowed his head. "Sir, I have come to request that I be allowed to leave Anbu and take up a genin team to train," came the slightly muffled voice. Sarutobi smiled. He knew why this man wanted a team and he knew two of the kids he wanted. "I take it you wish to request Naruto-ku?" "Hi Hokage-sama." Sarutobi nodded and smiled. "Then you may return to HQ and turn in your mask with my blessing." "But Hitaki," he stopped and turned to the man. "Do not make me regret this," he said with slight venom in his voice. "Hi Hokage-sama, I will not let you or sensei down," he said before jumping away. The third just smiled and looked back out at the village enjoying the sunrise. "I know you won't." Kakashi. Naruto had a small grin on his face as he walked down the streets of Konoha. People looked at him and did a double take, not believing what they were seeing. Naruto walked down the street wearing not his kill me orange jumpsuit that everyone knew him to wear. No, now he walked down the street in a pair of black shinobi pants. A black long-sleeved shirt with red-orange stripes going down each side. A red-orange vest over the shirt and his shinobi band on his right shoulder, while his left had the orange symbol of the Uzumaki clan on it. This was what Naruto found in the wrapped package that his godfather Jiraiya, the Toad Sage, had sent him. He smiled as he thought about his new clothes and what he planned to do to that eyesore of a jumpsuit. "Hee Kit. You really hated that thing, didn't you?" chuckled Kurama. Naruto nodded and quietly thought. "Yeah, I did. That was just a horrible color." He heard Kurama laugh again before returning to watching what Naruto was seeing in the village. As he walked, Naruto thought over what he was going to do now. He knew that he was going to become a genin and join a team. But what he wanted to know was what to do about Kurama and the knowledge he now had. Kurama decided to speak up. "Mind if I give my opinion, Kit?" Naruto gave him the go-ahead and continued walking. "I think you ought to tell the third the truth about me and you knowing about your parents." Also, I think you ought to begin training sooner rather than later. Your teacher can do much, but you have some abilities that others don't. Naruto chuckled. You, for instance. I have access to your full chakra and can use it to perform more advanced jutsu. Kurama gave the affirmative and listened. Yeah, I probably should start training. Jiraiya gave me some training scrolls I have hidden away so I can use those to help me. Kurama nodded and was about to speak when he noticed Naruto had turned his attention to someone. Someone was a young girl with dark blue hair and pale eyes. Her face was slightly hidden by a large jacket she wore. Kurama sensed his host's thoughts and chuckled. Why don't you tell her then, Kit? Naruto jumped from the question and a blush appeared on his cheeks before he turned away. I don't know what you're talking about, Kurama-san. Kurama frowned and sifted through Naruto's memories before sighing and laying his head down. Whatever you say, Kit. I'm just stating my opinion. Naruto winced at his tone and kept walking, not noticing that the young girl in question had turned and was watching him walk away. Naruto-kun. Naruto sighed as we walked into the reception room of the Hokage's office and looked at the assistant at the desk. She looked up and smiled at the boy before standing. Just a second, Naruto-kun, I will see if he's available. Naruto nodded and stood there waiting. He looked up and saw a picture of his father on the wall along with the other 3 Hokage's pictures. Naruto smiled and walked up to it. Placing his hand on the frame, he quietly whispered, Dad. Just then the assistant walked out. She had heard Naruto's whispered and was shocked that the kid knew his heritage. Naruto turned to see the woman staring at him in shock. You knew, didn't you? He asked quietly. She nodded, stunned to speak and also a little scared he would lash out. But the boy just smiled and looked at her. It's okay. I know why no one told me. I actually found out accidentally. An old scroll Gigi let me borrow. The woman nodded and then motioned for Naruto to go ahead and enter the office. Naruto walked into the office to see the third sitting at his desk fighting a never-ending battle he always had. Paperwork. Naruto chuckled and decided to help the old man out after this meeting. Hey Gigi, he said loudly to get the mont's attention. The third looked up and smiled at Naruto. Ah, Naruto, please come in and sit down. Naruto did as suggested and took the offered seat before looking at the old man. The Hokage smiled at him. So what can I do for my newest ninja Naruto-kun? Naruto smiled and looked down. He was nervous on how to approach the man about this subject, yet he knew he needed to. I don't know where to start, Gigi. The third looked at Naruto and sat up. Start at the beginning and take your time. I have no appointments today. Naruto nodded and sat back. First, can we talk privately, please? Any Anbu you have in here, please have them go. Except Dog if he's here. The third nodded with a wave of his hand. 5 Anbu men came out of hiding and left the room. Naruto smiled and sat back looking out the window. His thoughts were suddenly pulled to a memory of a few years back. Flashback. A young Naruto ran down the streets of Konoha. Behind him the villagers chased him with knives and spears. It was one of the villagers' favorite things to do. Chase away the demon brat and beat him to an inch of his life before either the third or Anbu arrived. Naruto ran quickly, his clothes already shredded and torn. Cuts and bruises adorned his body and he felt like he just wanted to curl up and die. Why do they hate me? What did I do to them? Naruto felt a rock scratch his face and he picked up his pace to try and escape his pursuers even more. But he knew he couldn't. Suddenly he turned a corner and saw that he had hit a dead end. Turning, he saw the villagers all with that evil look in their eyes. So decided to stop running. Demon. Gonna take your punishment like the monster you are. Naruto shook his head and started to back away. Please, Jay. Just leave me alone. I haven't done anything. I just won. He wasn't able to finish as the man who had spoken grabbed him and flung him against the ally wall. Shut up, you demon. Bekkasu of you are families, our friends, our leader is dead. The horde cheered the man on and encouraged him to hurt the young boy. Naruto just laid curled up cowering, his face hidden and praying that it would be over soon. The man sneered and grabbed Naruto again, this time around the throat, stopping all breathing that the boy could do. Oh, I'm gonna enjoy this. I'm gonna finish what the fourth started. As he said those words, a sudden breeze popped up and the man realized that Naruto was no longer in his hands. Turning, he saw that the boy was now clutched in the arms of a man with a dog mask and silver gravity-defying hair. Next to him stood a figure in a white and red cloak and a red hat with a white diamond. The masked man handed the boy to the cloaked man who was glaring at the mob. "Deal with them, dog, I don't want to see their faces again on my streets," he said, his voice filled with cold fury. The masked man nodded and after forming a quick series of hand seals ending on the tiger seal took a deep breath and eyeballed it in a giant ball of fire. The cloaked man turned away to hide the carnage from the boy's eyes. Yet he couldn't hide the sounds. The screams from the burning men reached the boy's ears and he cried into the man's cloak. The man just held him and waited for the dark deed to be done. As the screams died down, a voice spoke up from behind the man. "It is done, Lord Hokage." The Hokage nodded and looked down at the boy. "I am taking Naruto to my office. Meet us there after cleaning up." "Hi." The Hokage didn't wait for a reply and took off towards his office. End flashback. Naruto sighed as the memory washed over him. The Hokage had taken him to his office and healed his wounds and given him some new clothes before sending him to the apartment he now had. His memories had made him have courage to talk to the man. After all, this was the man that had always shown kindness and compassion towards him when no one else would. Turning, Naruto looked at the Hokage and smiled. "What do you know about the Kyuubi no Kitsune?" Sarutobi blinked in surprise and sat back. "Not much, I'm afraid. The fourth knew more than me." Naruto smiled. "Yes, my father did know quite a lot, didn't he?" The fourth sputtered and fell back in his chair as Naruto made that comment. Naruto, knowing what the reaction was going to be, fell back laughing, holding his sides as he rolled on the floor. Kurama was laughing within Naruto's mind as well. "That was perfect, kid." The look on his face. The fox roared loudly and rolled over as his sides started to hurt from the laughter. Sarutobi blinked and stood up, glaring at the boy that rolled around on the floor of his office. Picking his chair up, he let Naruto laugh as his mind rang through his thoughts a mile a minute. How did he find out? Did Jiraiya tell him? No, Jiraiya would have let me know if he had told the how did he learn about his father. He stared at the boy a bit before coughing into his hand to get the boy's attention. Naruto heard the cough and took a few deep breaths to calm down. Still chuckling, he stood up and righted his own chair. "Sorry Gigi, your response was just a funny." Sarutobi just growled and looked at his adoptive grandson. "Naruto, how did you learn about your father?" Naruto smiled and sat back looking at his adoptive grandfather. "Better sit back, Gigi, this is a long story," he said before telling him everything that had happened the day before. Sarutobi sat back and stared at the boy in front of him. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Not only had Naruto learned of and met the Kyuubi, but he had freed it within his mind as well. Also, the boy had learned of who his parents were and had even spoken with his father briefly through a chakra memory that had been placed within him as well. The old man shook his head and took a long drag on his pipe. He had thought he had seen everything there was to see in the world, but this boy always seemed to have just one more surprise left for him. Naruto sat waiting for the old man to say something. He had just revealed everything to the man he considered a grandfather and was honestly scared about what would happen now. He was pulled out of his musings as Sarutobi gave a chuckle that turned into a full-blown laugh. Naruto stared, slightly shocked and a little scared. Kurama was along the same line of thinking. Did he go insane or something, kid? Why is he laughing? Naruto shrugged and looked at the third, trying to figure that very question out. Sarutobi stopped laughing and looked at Naruto. "Sorry Naruto, I just realized something and I had to laugh about it." Naruto raised an eyebrow. "Oh," was all he said as Sarutobi started to laugh again. "Yes. You see, your father had me sign a document stating that until you graduated the academy, I and those who witnessed the signing were not allowed to reveal your heritage to anyone, including you. It is this reason that you have lived in that shack of an apartment all this time and not your family home. But now I am allowed to reveal who you are to everyone in the village and give you what you rightfully deserve." Naruto sat there in disbelief, and then a smile lit his face as he launched forward and hugged the old man. "Thank you Gigi, thank you so much." Sarutobi laughed and hugged the boy close. "No problem Naruto. Now I need to call a council meeting, and when I reveal everything you need to act surprised. But I'm sure you know how to do that. After all, you acted like an idiot in class all these years." Naruto chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. "Yay, no prob, old man." The Hokage chuckled and walked out to tell his assistant to summon the council for a meeting. Naruto sat in a chair before the council, staring at the people who had been making his life a living hell. The council, the leaders of Konoha, Each member was either a high-ranking ex-shinobi or one of the clan heads. They were the leaders of the village and they made the Hokage's life as difficult as possible. Always grabbing for more power, always trying to corrupt and ruin the village for their own gain. As far as Naruto knew, the Hokage was the only member with a heart on the council. As the council settled down, the Hokage stood up and looked at them. "Thank you for coming here. What I am about to say is..." He began to speak with one of the council members spoke up. "Hokage, what is he doing here?" The man said, pointing a finger at Naruto and sneering the word, he. The Hokage glared at the man and spoke in a quiet yet angry tone. "Naruto is here because what I am about to tell you all concerns him as well as you." He stopped and glared at the council, his anger growing. "For too long you have tried to harm and abuse Naruto for something he had no control over. You attack him, you ignore him, you charge him extra for the smallest of things." He glared at them. "And the only reason for it is that you don't know the boy's heritage. If you did, you would never have dared to do such things." One of the council looked up at this and frowned. "What do you mean? He has no heritage. He's a clan-less orphan." The Hokage just smiled and pulled out a scroll from his sleeve. Turning, he tossed it to a woman with long, spiky, untamed brown hair, vertical slit-like pupils, elongated canine teeth and nails. She also had fang markings on her cheeks as well as markings over her eyes and a dark shade of purple lipstick. She wore the standard outfit of a Konoha shinobi, consisting of flak jacket and a black suit underneath with the sleeves rolled up and bandages around her legs. She didn't wear the village's forehead protector. "Sume read that, if you would please." The woman, Sume, nodded and opened the scroll. "As of this day, October 10th, the day of the Kyuubi's attack, I, Minato Namikaze, do decree that Sarutobi Hiruzen and all witnesses to this is hereby ordered to hide all knowledge of my relation to my son, Naruto Uzumaki, until such time as he has become a genin of Konoha or discovers the knowledge himself. Upon the announcement of this, all affairs are to be given over to him and no other. Should anyone disbelieve that Naruto is my son, they are to go to the Uzumaki estate and have Naruto place his blood upon the blood seal that locks the gate shut. This is my final order as 4th Hokage. Signed, Minato Namikaze, Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sume Inuzuka, and Shikaku Nara." The council sat unbelieving as they heard what was being read. Sume and Shikaku just smiled and looked at Naruto with kindness. They had been good friends of Minato and Kushina and had wanted to tell the boy, but the fourth had also forbade them from saying anything. Naruto just sat there, his eyes wide, his mouth dropped open as he comprehended what was being said. One council member looked at Shikaku and quietly asked, "Is this true? Is Naruto really the fourth son?" Shikaku nodded and looked at the man. "Yes, he is. But if you don't believe me, the Hokage, or Sume, then we need to go to the estate and prove if. But if you believe, then there shouldn't be any problem." The man nodded and sat back. Another man stood up and looked at the Hokage. "I don't think we need go to the estate." He reached into his arm and pulled out a scroll. "This scroll was given to me as a gift by the fourth," he said when the time came to give it to his son. He looked at Naruto, his thoughts drifting. "I should have realized Naruto was Minato's son a long time ago. He is a spitting image of him as a kid. And I should know. I was the Guy Academy instructor." He stood and walked up to Naruto. "Here, kid, it's sealed with a blood seal. If it opens, you are Minato's son, if not, then you're not." Naruto looked at him, then at the scroll. He looked at the fourth and then spoke. "Is it true?" The man frowned, nodded. "Yes, you are the fourth son." Naruto nodded and then took the offered scroll. Lifting his thumb, he bit down using his longer incisors and wiped the blood on the seal. The council watched and gasped as the seal disappeared and the scroll started to open. The man jumped forward and closed it, watching as the seal reappeared. He looked at Naruto. "This is for your eyes only, boy. Blood seals are a sign of family secrets." Naruto nodded and held the scroll close to him. He didn't need to act like it was precious, and now his surprise was real. Sarutobi smiled and patted the boy's shoulder before walking over to a wall and placing his hand on it. As the council watched, the wall disappeared to reveal a small cubby with a large scroll with the Uzumaki clan symbol on it. Turning, he handed the scroll to Naruto and smiled. "That holds everything you need, the key and address of your new home, your family's account ledgers, and a few other items." Naruto nodded and grabbed the scroll close to him. The Hokage smiled and looked at the council. I will announce this to the village later today. I would like all of you there to validate what I am saying." The council all nodded and the Hokage dismissed them except for the Inuzuka clan head. "Sume, could you go to Naruto's apartment please and gather his belongings and then take them to the estate please?" The woman bowed and then smiled at Naruto. "Sure thing, I will see you later kid." She waved and then darted off. Sarutobi smiled and looked at Naruto who now looked stunned. He had his head down resting on the large scroll. The man smiled and walked forward saying the boy's name. He frowned when there was no response and then smiled when he heard a light snoring. Chuckling, the man picked Naruto up and walked back to his office. Laying the boy on his couch, he returned to his desk. "Guess he really was surprised after all," he said, chuckling as he began the paperwork to make Naruto the official new head of the newly recreated Uzumaki clan. Naruto awoke to the sound of dripping, and when he opened his eyes he saw he was once again in the sewer portion of his mindscape. Sighing, he stood up and groaned as he felt his bones pop back into place. With a sigh, he turned and headed towards Kurama's room. As he walked, he looked at the sewer. It was strange. Why did his mind look like this? Why not something else? He shook his head and kept walking until he reached the door to the Kyuubi's domain and opened it. Entering the large room, Naruto saw Kurama laying down on the floor, his head resting in his large front hand paws. Naruto smiled as he looked at the fox. A feeling of peace had settled over him, and as he neared the fox it grew until he felt more relaxed than he had ever felt before. Walking up to the fox, he stopped by his head and reached out. Placing his hand on Kurama's head, he marveled at the softness of the fox's fur and smiled as he started to stroke it. He smiled again as he felt and heard Kurama give a slight purr like a cat. Naruto chuckled and sat down next to the great fox, taking his hand off the fox's head. As he did, Kurama opened an eye and looked at him. "Hello kid. Thank you for that, by the way, it felt nice." Naruto smiled and nodded. "Hello Kurama-san. And you're welcome. I would keep doing it, only your head is a bit too high up for me." Kurama seemed to think about this for a moment before he suddenly shrunk down to be the size of a horse and moved his body so he was curled around Naruto. "There, now you can continue." Naruto chuckled and reached his hand up and once again petted Kurama's head. Kurama once again let out that purr and sighed as Naruto's hands worked across his head. "Neither of my other containers were ever willing to be this close to me. So I never experienced this. It is good." Naruto smiled and leaned back against the fox's muscled body and looked above him at the room's ceiling. "So Kit, what brings you to my realm? Not that I'm complaining. You are more than welcome here any time." Naruto smiled and scratched behind the fox's ears, earning another pure greater than the last ones. Chuckling, Naruto looked down at his friend. "To be honest, I'm slightly scared." Kurama looked at him, his eyes asking why. "Well, all this time people have hated and feared me. Only a few have shown me any kindness. Now I feel as if this will change their opinion." Kurama growled his mind, not understanding what he was saying. "Isn't that a good thing though? I thought you wanted the recognition." Naruto nodded. "I do. It's just that." He stopped and stared down at his lap. "I want them to recognize me for me, not for who my father or mother was." Kurama watched as his container released one of his hidden fears to him. He may have had access to Naruto's mind, but that didn't mean that he pried and accessed everything. No, the kid had a right to his own life and thoughts. Kurama would never delve unless he tried to understand something, like with the girl in the market, and even then he had only skimmed the surface knowledge. Growling slightly in worry, the fox raised its head and pressed it against Naruto's chest in a comforting manner. "Worry not, Kit. Yes, others will see you as your father, and that will be why they recognize you. But others still will look at you and only see you. You shouldn't worry about that and just accept it. If you worry, then you will only question yourself." He raised his head and gazed into Naruto's eyes. "You want to be recognized, then grow strong. Stronger than your father. Stronger than his master. Stronger than any cage before you, and show them just who you are. That is how you will be recognized for you. Prove to them not to look down at Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, son of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki." Naruto stared at the fox for a moment before he smiled and wrapped his arms around the fox's head. "Thank you, Kurama-san. Thank you." Kurama purred and closed his eyes as he felt the tears begin to stream down the boy's face. "Peace, kid, all is well. Rest here with me for now before you return to the physical realm. Let your mind relax and sleep. I will keep you safe." He felt Naruto's sobbing start to fade and lifted his head to see that the boy had slumped forward, emotional exhaustion making him fall asleep fast. Kurama chuckled and moved the boy so he was laying down before curling up around him, laying his tails over him like a blanket. "Sleep, kid. All will be well when you awaken." Naruto awoke from his mindscape to the sound of pen on paper and opened his eyes to see the third sitting at his desk working on his paperwork, grumbling the whole time about this taking too long to do. Naruto smiled slightly and then yawned while stretching, alerting the old man that he was now awake. Sarutobi looked up to see his adoptive grandson now awake and sitting up on the couch, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His two new scrolls were next to him, with the larger one being clutched to his side by his left hand. Chuckling, Sarutobi stood up and walked over to him. "I see you are awake now. I take it you had a good sleep?" Naruto nodded, stretching his arms up and arching his back almost cat-like. "Yeah, I did. Who knew that foxes made such good pillows?" Sarutobi blinked in surprise and then realized that Naruto must have entered his mindscape and slept in the shelter of the Kyuubi. This thought slightly troubled him though, and he decided to speak to the boy about it at a later time. "Well, that's good to hear," he said, standing straight. He turned and walked back to his desk. "And now that you're awake, perhaps you would be willing to see to your affairs. I had to cancel my appointments today so you could sleep," he said in a slightly gruff tone, even though he didn't mind in the least bit. It gave him time to catch up on paperwork. Naruto blinked and then grinned sheepishly while rubbing the back of his head awkwardly. Sorry Gigi. I'll go ahead and go then," he said as he stood up, grabbing the two scrolls that were with him. The third nodded and sat back in his chair as Naruto headed towards the door. Naruto suddenly stopped and looked at the Hokage. "Oh Gigi." The third looked at him. "You do realize if you used shadow clones this would get done a lot faster, right?" Sarutobi blinked as the words processed before his face faltered as he realized that Naruto was right. Naruto chuckled and left the office. Sarutobi sighed, took his Hokage hat off, and after clearing the area on the desk in front of him started to repeatedly slam his head into the desk, all the while chanting, "Baka, baka, baka, baka." Naruto sighed as he exited the tower. Taking a deep breath, he looked around and noticed that it was starting to get dark out. Sighing again, Naruto went to turn towards his apartment when he felt someone land next to him. "If you're going to that dump, don't bother, I already emptied it of your belongings, Namikaze-sama." Naruto turned to see the Inazaka clan head smiling at him and holding a scroll in her hand. Tossing it to him, she smirked. "That's all your belongings, even that box that I'm guessing your Kyofu." Naruto smiled at her and took the scroll. "Thank you, Sume-sama. Even if the place was a dump, I had some personal things there. But I know you didn't get everything," he said with a slight smirk. The woman's smile widened and narrowed her eyes. "Oh, do you mean that small collection of scrolls you had in that genjutsu hidden closet?" Naruto deadpanned and smiled sheepishly. "I guess you did find everything," he said, rubbing the back of his head. Sume laughed and nodded. "Yep, but that genjutsu was so good that if it weren't for the fact I had Kuromaru with me," she said, looking at the large wolf-like dog that Naruto just now noticed was next to her. Naruto smiled and looked at the dog. "Thank you, Kuro-sama." The nin dog gave a slight nod of its head before barking at Sume. Sume looked at the dog and nodded. "Right, but first I should show Namikaze-sama here his new home." The dog nodded and looked at Naruto. Naruto chuckled and nodded before motioning for Sume to lead the way. Sume smiled and turned towards the clan district of Konoha. Naruto followed his two scrolls held in his arms protectively. Sume glanced back at him and decided to ask him something. "So tell me, Namikaze-sama, what is your ambition in life?" Naruto frowned and thought before answering. "Well, it used to be to become Hokage, but now..." He trailed off, his thoughts a jumble as he tried to work them out. Sume nodded. "Now you're unsure," she said as if it was simple knowledge. Naruto nodded and sighed. Sume smiled at him and began picking up her speed to get them to his new home faster. Naruto stared up at the gate before him and the building that was behind it. This is mine?" Sume smiled and her partner Kuromaru growled in a laughing way. "Yep kid, it is. I would give you a tour, but I need to get home and fill the clan elders in on everything." Naruto nodded and looked up at the gate before smiling at Sume. "Thank you, Sume-san." Sume smiled and ruffled his hair. "No prob kid, as clan heads got to stick together." Naruto blushed at her reminder that he was now considered a clan head by the council. Sume laughed and turned away, her canine companion following. "Have a good night, kid." Naruto waved and then turned towards the gate. "Well, Kurama-san, what do you think?" he asked his current tenant. Kurama looked through Naruto's eyes and smiled. "That things are going to get really fun now. Old man and lady had a massive library in there. Even some experiments they were working on." Naruto nodded and walked up to the gate. Kurama gave him a quick instruction on how to open the gate, and Naruto watched as a ripple of blue chakra encompassed the gate and watched it swing open on its own. The gate and doors of the compound are linked to your chakra kit. Only you or someone related to you can open them. Naruto nodded and walked up to the front door and, placing his hand on the handle, opened the door to his new home. At first he was surprised. He expected to see the place empty, but in fact it was like no one had ever left. He looked around to see that no dust covered the furniture and the place had the feeling of being quite homey. "It feels like I belong," he thought to himself. Kurama, within his mind, nodded and looked through the kit's eyes a bit before speaking up. "You should go rest, kid. I promise you will get to know this place quite well." Naruto chuckled and nodded before following Kurama's instructions to the master bedroom, now his room. As he opened the door, he took one look at the bed and with a groan jumped on it and sighed as he felt its comfort start to pull him into sleep. 2 days later, Naruto stood in the center of a clearing in the middle of a forest. The wind blew across the grass beneath him and rustled the leaves in the trees. Red and blue flowers dotted the clearing floor and birds sang in the afternoon air. The blond boy stood atop a tall, narrow pole no wider than his arm. One foot rested on the pole while the other rested on the side of his leg. His hands were placed together, palms touching, and his eyes were closed as he slowly breathed in and out. As he stood there, a strong breeze suddenly blew up, but instead of moving the young blonde, it seemed to bend and move around him as if something was stopping it from disturbing him. Taking a deep breath, Naruto opened his eyes and looked straight ahead. As he did, he smiled and let out a slight chuckle. "You can come out of hiding, you know. I don't mind sharing the clearing." At first nothing happened, but then the bushes behind him rustled and a young girl around his age walked out. Her hair was a dark blue and her eyes a pale lavender. She wore a large jacket as if to cover her body up and a Konoha protector around her neck. How did you know I was there?" she asked, a slight quiver in her voice as she spoke. As Naruto heard her speak, his eyes grew wide and a slight blush adorned his face. "Oh, Hinata-san, I didn't know it was you." He quickly spun around and jumped off the wooden pole to stand in front of her. Bowing, he tried to hide his blush before speaking again. I was able to tell you were there due to a bloodline ability I have." Hinata looked at him, her eyes widening. "Why? You have a bloodline?" Naruto nodded and looked her in the eye while rubbing the back of his head. "Yeah, I have a few actually. Most are from my mother's side, but I inherited a few from my dad. But most of them haven't activated yet," he said. His thoughts traveled back to when he had learned about his bloodlines. Flashback. Naruto stood at the door to his family's library. Kurama had been giving him a tour of the home all day and said that this was the last place he had to go. "Alright kid, in order to get into here, first place your palm on the round seal there. You're right, preferably." Naruto followed the instructions. "Good, now using your other hand, hold it up with your index and middle fingers pointing up while you curl your other fingers and thumb in." Naruto tried and asked, "Like this?" Kurama chuckled. "Yes, like that. Now channel chakra into the seal and yell out Kai as if you were dispelling a genjutsu." Naruto nodded and, focusing, began to channel chakra into the seal. Then when that started, brought the hand seal up and quickly called out, "Kai." Naruto watched as the doors shuddered and began to open inwards towards the library. In his mind, Kurama was chuckling and smiling proudly. "Well done, kid. Now your entire family's collection of jutsu is yours." Naruto stood amazed as he looked into the room that was obviously as large as, if not larger than, the compound itself. "How is this even here? It's as big as the Konoha library." Kurama chuckled. "Thank your old man for that. When he married your mother, she brought with her the entire collection of knowledge from Uzushiogakure. As such, she needed a place to put it all. And since she at the time didn't really trust the village except for a select few, she asked Minato to create a place for it all." Naruto nodded. "But how did he do it?" Kurama chuckled. Kid, your father was not only a master of seals but a master of spacetime ninjutsu. He created a combination that makes a larger space. Naruto frowned and thought about that. So you're saying that using his ability with space-time ninjutsu and his amazing sealing techniques, he created a small pocket resembling another dimension to act as the clan's library and hold all the scrolls? Kurama laid frozen within Naruto's mindscape as he processed the boy's words. As what the kid said became realized to him, his eyes widened and his jaw, even though it was already flat on the floor, somehow found a way to drop a few feet. How did you figure that out? I thought you didn't understand complex theories like that? Naruto chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, I actually understand a lot more than most people think. Kurama sighed and chuckled. He's a lot more cunning than I gave him credit for. I wonder how intelligent he really is. Okay kid, well, first things first, while here, I want you to see if there is any information on bloodlines of the Uzumaki clan. Naruto blinked and tilted his head back as he thought about something. Bloodline? You mean like the Sharingan for the Uchiha or the Byakugan for the Hyuga? Kurama nodded. Yes. A bloodline or Kekkei Genkei are abilities passed down genetically within specific clans. It's possible for a shinobi to have more than one of these abilities. Kekkei Genkei abilities that work via the user's eye are called dojutsu. Other Kekkei Genkei include mixing one type of elemental chakra with another, creating a new one unique to the users, which is usually impossible for normal ninja, or other bodily manipulations that are usually unachievable by normal standards. I believe I know of at least one you may inherit from your mother, but there may be more that I am unaware of. Naruto nodded and with that thought in mind dashed into the giant library and began roaming it. He spent about half an hour going from one end of the area to the next before he found what he was looking for. Aha, here we go, he said, grabbing a scroll of a shelf. Uzumaki bloodlines. Turning, Naruto walked back to the center of the room where a large desk sat. Reaching it, he went to sit down when he saw a seal placed on the desk's surface. What is this? Kurama, can you tell what this is? Kurama gazed through Naruto's eyes at the seal and growled in annoyance. We just wasted half an hour, kid. This seal is a summon and reverse summon seal linked to all the scrolls in this place. All you have to do is apply a bit of chakra and think about what you want and it will appear for you. Same with the reverse. Damn it, if I had known that was there I would have told you about it. Naruto chuckled. Well, at least we know now, so we won't always have to search through this place like mad. Kurama agreed and told Naruto to open the scroll. Naruto sat down and placing the scroll in front of him opened it and started to look through it. Wow, are you seeing this, Kurama? Kurama nodded. Indeed. It seems you may possess quite a few skills, kid. Most of these we won't be able to know about for at least a few years. And the rest need either practice or special circumstances. Naruto nodded. Yep, so we should focus on the ones I can practice. Looking down, he started to name off the few he was able to start on. Chakra chains, sensory, storm release, ice release, and cyclone release, too. He looked down and smiled. Wow, these are some strong techniques. They will require a lot of training. Kurama nodded. Indeed. Now send that back and see if there is any knowledge on the Namikaze clan. 3. Naruto nodded and placed the scroll on the seal while thinking of sending it back to its shelf. The scroll disappeared with a puff of smoke and Naruto did the opposite, but thinking about his dad's clan. With another puff, another scroll appeared. Okay, let's see, Naruto said. Once again, lots of weights and some special circumstances. Ah, here we go, these are the ones I need. He looked down at the techniques that his dad had left him. Swift release, steel release, lava release, crystal release, and plasma release. Naruto sat back, his thoughts on the 2 scrolls he had just read. It took him a minute, but he realized what they meant. All these elemental abilities. They are fused elemental abilities. If I inherited them all, then that means... He stopped and quickly turning around dashed out of the library and towards the training room. Running in, he went over to a small desk with little cubbyholes. Opening one, he pulled out a piece of paper. It was small and rectangular. Arrow Sennin wanted to test my element, but I always said I would wait. I think I need to now. Channeling some chakra into the paper, he watched as it split into 4 pieces and each piece had a different effect. One square caught on fire, another wrinkled up, another crumbled away, and the last became soaked. Kurama stared amazed from within Naruto. First his intelligence, now this. What is this child? He blinked and then spoke up. Congratulations, Kit. You are the first person aside from the Sage of the Six Paths to be born with a natural affinity for all 5 base elements. Which means that you probably can use all the fused ones as well. Naruto just stared at what was left of the chakra paper unbelieving. Finally, as reality caught up to him, his eyes rolled into the back of his head and he fell backwards into a faint. Flashback end. Naruto was shaken from his thoughts as Hinata coughed into her hand. He blinked and looked at her and chuckled sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head. Sorry, Hinata-san. Just remembering when I found out about my bloodline. Hinata nodded and looked around. So what were you training here? She saw a few spots on the ground that looked like something had hit them hard. Naruto chuckled again and looked around. 2 of my mom's abilities. The chakra chains and sensory abilities. Hinata looked at him. Chakra chains? Naruto nodded and smiled. Yep, here, watch. He raised a hand and pointed it at a tree across the clearing. Then with a deep breath launched a long chain of chakra tipped with a kunai at the said tree. The chain ran out and slammed into the tree, piercing it with the kunai. Hinata gasped and stared in awe at the golden chain. Naruto waved his hand in a whipping motion and the chain detached from the tree and returned to his arm. I can even wrap them around things and use them like whips. I have also learned that using the same technique I can create similar weapons like a whip sword or just a plain whip. Hinata nodded and then looked at the pole. Why were you on the pole? Naruto smiled. I was practicing my sensory ability. When I'm calm and still I can sense up to 20 miles away, otherwise it's only like 5. When I'm not focusing I can sense within a mile radius. Hinata blinked in surprise and made a "oh" sound. Naruto chuckled again and looked at her. So anything I can help you with? Hinata blushed and started to tap her fingers together, looking down. She mumbled something that Naruto couldn't hear and he frowned. What was that, Hinata-san? Hinata's blush darkened and taking a deep breath spoke again. Could you help me with my taijutsu? I'm having trouble with our family style. Naruto frowned. Your family is mostly earth users, right? Hinata nodded and Naruto pulled out a piece of chakra paper from his pouch. Here, channel some chakra into this. Hinata took it and after channeling some chakra watched as the paper split in 2 and became damp. Naruto laughed. No wonder your family's style doesn't work. Your elements are water and air, not earth. Hinata nodded and looked at him. So what should I do? Naruto put his hand to his chin and thought before smiling and slamming his fist onto his palm. Well, first we're going to go talk to your dad to see if he has any advice. And then we are going to see about making your own variation of your family's style. Hinata blushed and nodded. Oh, okay. Naruto blinked at her stutter. You weren't stuttering a little bit ago. Why are you nervous? She looked down and mumbled again. Naruto sighed and tapped his foot. Hinata blushed and looked up. My father, I'm worried he will be upset with me. Naruto scoffed. If he is, then he is. That's his problem. I for one think that you being water and air based is better. It means you need a more flexible style. And with your family's abilities that could be very good. Hinata nodded, not talking, as Naruto gathered his things and started to walk away with her quickly following. Naruto walked with Hinata up to the gates of the Hyuga compound. Hinata seemed a little nervous, but Naruto put that up to being with him. Walking up to the gate, Naruto bowed to the guard that was stationed there before speaking. Hyuga-sama, I wish to request a meeting with Hiyashi-sama. The man looked at him, his eyes cold and pale. And who may I tell him is requesting the meeting? Naruto smiled. It was time to see if the announcement yesterday had any effect. You may tell him that Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze requests the meeting. He watched as the mont's eyes widened before bowing low. My apologies, Namikaze-sama, I did not recognize you. I will go at once. Naruto nodded and let out a sigh and groan as the man left. Hinata looked at him with curiosity. Naruto sighed again and answered the unasked question. I don't like using my dad's name to get stuff. I would rather be known as Naruto Uzumaki instead of Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. People just see me as my father's son, not as me. Hinata nodded in understanding. She had much of the same problem as did most clan heirs aside from one. Both looked up to see the man from before leading another man who wore robes of a much finer make. The man stopped before them and bowed. Namikaze-sama, Lady Hinata-san, Hiyashi-sama will see you in the sunroom. If you would follow me. Naruto nodded and walked after the man, Hinata trailing behind him, staring in wonder as the man hadn't sneered at her. The man led the two of them into the main house and out to the back where a large open room that overlooked a beautiful garden stood. Naruto walked over to the window to see the garden as the man bowed again. Lord Hiyashi will be here momentarily. Naruto nodded and the man left. Naruto once again let out a sigh and then smiled as he looked at the garden. You have a beautiful garden here, Hinata. Hinata smiled sadly. It was my mom's before she passed away. When she did, my father let me take over caring for it. I enjoy the work. I always have. Naruto nodded and went to say something when another voice spoke up. And she does an amazing job of it too. Naruto turned to see a man standing in the doorway wearing the most elegant robes he had seen yet. His long black hair and pale eyes marked him of the family, but this bare brow without the branch seal showed who he really was. Naruto bowed. Hiyashi-sama. Hiyashi laughed and waved away the greeting. Don't worry about being formal. I know you hate it. And I only act that way because I have to. Naruto nodded and walked over to the small table in the middle of the room and sat down as Hiyashi sat across from him and Hinata sat in between them. So Naruto, what do I owe the honor of your visit? I take since it's not for a prank and Hinata is with you, this has to do with her? Hiyashi asked. Naruto nodded and picked up the small cup of tea that Hinata had poured for him and her father. After thanking her, he took a sip and smiled at the calming effect it had. Placing the cup down, he looked up. Hi, Hiyashi-san. Hinata came to me while I was training with my bloodlines and asked if I would help her train her family style. She informed me that it didn't seem to work for her at all. Hiyashi nodded. Yes, I have noticed that. But some of the women have found it difficult in the past to learn our style. Naruto nodded. That being said, I had her use some chakra paper and checked her element affinity. Hiyashi frowned. Why, she is earth like all Hyuga? Naruto shook his head. No, Hiyashi-san, she's not. Hiyashi gasped and looked at him, then Hinata. What element then? Naruto laughed. Actually, she is too. A rare thing indeed. They are air and water. Hiyashi nodded and brought his hand up to his chin. I see. We never checked to see if anyone had a different affinity than earth, so we always taught them the same. Naruto nodded and took a sip of his tea again. I figured that. I came to ask your permission to help Hinata to develop a style that suits her better than the style she is using now. Obviously it needs to be based around the Juken, but I believe she needs a style that is more flexible than the Juken. Hiyashi nodded and thought for a bit before nodding again. Then you may help her, Namikaze-sama, and if you need any help from the clan, I am sure that her cousin Neji would be willing to help. Naruto nodded and saw Hinata stiffen at the mention of her cousin's name. I will take that into consideration. But I believe I have an idea already. I have been in all honesty studying your family's style by watching and started to develop my own taijutsu style based off it that only I or someone like me can use. Hiyashi raised an eye at that and Naruto smiled and pulled out a piece of chakra paper and channeled chakra into it. Hiyashi gasped at what the paper did and Naruto nodded. So you see, I have a good idea about how to help Hinata here. Hiyashi nodded, still staring at the remains of the chakra paper. Naruto chuckled and stood up. Well, Hiyashi-sama, I need to be going. I have more training to do before this week break is up and I am assigned a team. Hiyashi nodded and looked up at Naruto. Understood, thank you for coming and revealing this knowledge to me. Naruto nodded and turned to leave. But he stomped and looked at Hinata. Hinata, come by my place, the Uzumaki compound tomorrow, and we will get you started on a new style. Hinata nodded and watched Naruto as he walked away. Hiyashi watched the boy leave before turning to look at his daughter. When you go to him, you will study and you will train your hardest. I now understand why you were unable to defeat Neji and Hanabi, and I apologize for my disbelief in you. Hinata nodded and Hiyashi stood up and opened the door and spoke to someone outside. Go get me Neji. A quick affirmative and the sound of footsteps followed as Hinata's father returned to the table. Soon the door reopened to allow another Hyuga, who could have been Hiyashi's son, walk in. His Konoha headband was in place on his forehead to hide the seal that branded him there. You wished to see me, Lord Hiyashi? Hiyashi nodded and motioned towards Hinata. I have discovered why my daughter has been having such a hard time learning our family's style. Neji looked at Hinata, his face forming a sneer. And why is that? Hiyashi caught his tone of voice and frowned. Because unlike you, me, and every other Hyuga, Hinata does not have a earth affinity. Neji's eyes widened and his sneer disappeared. What does she have? Air and water. Neji nodded and looked down. Yes, that would contradict with our style. She will never be able to learn it. His sneer started to return and Hiyashi nodded. Precisely, that is why she will be working with Naruto Uzumaki in creating a new style that is better suited for her. Neji gasped. Sir, the dead last, the failure. How can he help her, especially as she is beyond help? Hiyashi stood up and swung around kicking as he went and sent Neji into the wall. That is enough. I will not hear you degrading my daughter and the heir to the title of clan head ever again, do you understand me? Neji looked up, fear in his eyes, and nodded. The Hyuga clan head nodded and looked at his daughter. Make sure to tell Uzumaki-san he is welcome to come here to help you train as well when you see him tomorrow. Hinata nodded, too stunned to speak as her father left. Hinata sat there amazed at what had happened so far in her life just by going forward and asking Naruto for help. Naruto sighed as he entered his home and walked towards his own garden in the center of his compound. The place had grown with the time and now it was a miniature forest with a small clearing in the center. That was where Naruto went. In the center of the clearing was a large pond with a single round platform in the middle. Koi fish of all colors swam in the pond and once in a while their backs broke the surface of the water. Naruto sighed and walked to the round platform, channeling chakra into his feet as he walked so he could walk across the water, and took a lotus position on the ground. Then closing his eyes he focused and entered his mind. Opening his eyes he once again beheld the large room where Kurama lived. And once again he wished he knew a way to change it. He sighed and walked over to the large fox and sat down next to it, leaning his head back as the great fox breathed. You surprised me, Kit, Kurama spoke up. Naruto opened an eye and looked at the crimson orb that gazed at him. How so? Kurama chuckled and shifted his size to his horse size and laid his head in Naruto's lap. I didn't think you could act so maturity and proper as you did while speaking to that Hyuga. Naruto groaned and nodded. Gigi drilled me a few years back on how to talk to people properly. One of his lessons was on manners and maturity. Trust me, he can be a slave driver. Kurama laughed and nodded his head in understanding. So what is your plan with the Hyuga girl that you have a crush on? Naruto stuttered and started to blush deeply as Kurama laughed at his reaction. I don't have a crush on her, you Dame Fox. Kurama gazed at him and snorted. Quit lying to yourself, Kit. You forget I have access to your thoughts and feelings. I know how you feel about the girl. So I will ask again like I did 2 days ago. Why don't you tell her? Naruto looked down, his hair covering his eyes as he took a deep breath. Because she wouldn't be allowed to be with me. Kurama gazed at him and then sighed and curled up closer around his container. I'm sorry, Kit. Once again I have taken something that is precious to you away. Naruto reached out and grabbed the fox's head in a hug and shook his head. No, Kurama, the village has done that. Not you, not my San, or Ka-san. The village. Kurama sighed and nodded before pulling his head away and looking down at the boy. You best go, Kid. Tomorrow you begin training the Hyuga girl. And I have some things to begin teaching you as well. Naruto nodded and stood up. But before he left he looked around. Kurama, is there a way for you or me to change this place to be better? Kurama looked at him and then nodded. Of course there is. It's your mind, you can change it whenever you want. Naruto nodded and then smiled. Suddenly the area changed and they were in a large forest clearing with giant trees all around them, and the sounds of birds and other animals filled the air. Kurama stared in amazement before growing to his full size and saw that he was still not big enough to reach the top of the trees. He turned to see Naruto smiling at him. Thought you would enjoy a bit of a more natural place for you. Kurama smiled and then with a law-like yip jumped up and raced into the trees. Naruto smiled and left his mind. He did need to rest. 1 week later, the night sky shone brightly with a full moon as around it the stars shined brightly against the dark sky. No clouds blocked out the sight, so it was there for all to see. Beneath this beautiful sight the village of Konoha began to prepare for the next day by ending their own. Stores closed their windows and doors. Mothers called their children for dinner and husbands laughed as their children argued for a few more minutes of playtime. Yet this peaceful image was not held within the homes of some of the younger generation. Specifically those about to become full-on ninja and placed within a team of their classmates. And among that generation were 9 individuals who were counted as the next generation of great ninja. All of these 9 were at the top of their class and were trained to be the best. They were clan heirs and geniuses. Yet 6 of these 9 all had one thought on their mind. And it was due to this thought that those 6 were gathered together in one of the training fields of Konoha to talk about the next day. The clearing was a normal one, open and surrounded by trees. Yet within it were 3 wooden poles and a stone monument. 5 of the 6 young people sat around the clearing waiting on the 6th member of their group. Ino Yamanaka sat against one of the poles with her arms crossed and looking up at the night sky. Shino Aburame stood on the other side of the pole leaning against it and looked down at his hand that had a single beetle on one of his fingers. Choji Akamichi stood near the stone monument with his arms crossed talking to Kiba Inuzuka, who was standing next to him with his canine companion Akamaru on top of his head sleeping. The last of the 5, Sakura Haruno, sat on one of the other 3 poles dangling her legs and looking down at the ground. Finally the 6th member of the group appeared, but he wasn't alone. Shikamaru Nara stood in the center of the field looking at everyone with a bored expression, and standing next to him was another young man. One of the 9 that people called a prodigy. Sasuke Uchiha, the last of his clan and heir of said clan, stood with his arms crossed and eyes closed as he heard the others gasp. "Sasuke-kun!" yelled out both Ino and Sakura as they gazed at the boy with hearts in their eyes. Sasuke just sighed and shook his head before looking at Shikamaru. "So what did you want me to come here for?" Shikamaru looked at him and sighed. "I asked you here because aside from Hinata you're the only one of us to have spoken with and been around Naruto since the announcement." Sakura and Ino stopped and stared at the 2 boys as if they had grown 2 heads. "What are you talking about, Shikamaru? Sasuke-kun would never hang out with Naruto baka," Sakura stated, even though she knew he did from her watching him. Shikamaru looked at her and then sighed. "Sakura, I suggest you be quiet because you don't know what you're talking about." He turned and walked over to the memorial before leaning against it and then sighing. "Okay, everyone report," he stated. Shino stood up straight and walked into the center of the field. "Me and my bugs have watched Naruto for the past week and we have noticed that he has gone through very interesting training. He seems to have mastered 3 chakra training exercises and has begun training in elemental chakra, though I don't know what type as my bugs couldn't detect that." Shikamaru nodded and looked at Ino. "Your go." Ino nodded and looked at him. He hasn't been going to much of the stores around the area, though for the most part that's because some of them don't want to let him in, though I don't know why. Also he has purchased some strange items. For one, a chakra sphere as well as some special made clothes. Shikamaru nodded again and looked at Sakura. She sighed and looked away. "He has trained in both his own home and in the forest surrounding Konoha, though I don't know where it, due to him always noticing where I am even when I use a genjutsu." Shino nodded at that. "Yes, he seems to easily detect anyone to Thane." Shikamaru frowned and then looked at Choji and Kiba. "What about you two?" Kiba grunted. "Same as Sakura, can't get close before he notices us." Choji found out from some of the shop owners that there seems to be an old grudge against the brat, though no one will tell us, said they're not allowed to. Choji nodded to confirm that. Shikamaru sighed and looked up. "Okay, so here is what we have. Naruto has mastered chakra control and has begun work on training in elemental chakra. He has purchased items of an unknown use from the few shops that will let him in when others won't, due to some secret that is forbidden from all to know, yet they all know. He is able to detect anyone and thing around him, probably from a distance, and moves from training area to training area." The others aside from Sasuke nodded and Shikamaru nodded before looking at Sasuke. "Okay Uchiha, now do you see why we brought you here? As of now Naruto has become a wild card and no one knows his true potential. No, wait, only Hinata knows his possible potential and she won't share due to them training together. So what can you share with us?" Sasuke closed his eyes and looked down as if he was thinking. Everyone stared at him and then blinked in surprise as he gained a smirk and started to chuckle. "You really think I'm gonna tell you what he can do?" Sasuke opened his eyes and gazed at all of them. "I will say this much. The doob isn't a doob. If he wanted, he could have been the Rookie of the Year. He let me have that title and honor as he didn't want it." They all stared at him as he turned and walked away. "I will also say this." He stopped and looked at them. "When I go after the man I am after, I will be asking the doob for his assistance." Everyone opened their eyes at that. It was a well-known fact that Sasuke wanted to kill his brother and that he wanted to do it alone. That he would accept help, know that he would ask for Naruto's help, spoke a lot. Sasuke smirked and jumped away, leaving a group of astonished genin. Shikamaru sighed and shook his head before uttering his trademark word. "Troublesome." While the 7 of them were gathered, the person of their interest sat down on the back porch of his home staring down at a board with small stones of different colors on it. On the other side of the board rested a round crystal ball on a small cushion. Naruto raised his arm and moved a piece before saying, "Your move." At first nothing happened, then the crystal ball glowed a golden color and arm made of chakra and tipped with a clawed hand reached out and moved its own piece. "Your go, kid," spoke a voice from the crystal ball as the glow faded. Naruto nodded and began to think as a man who sat leaning against one of the poles that held the porch roof up, read an orange book yet watched the game. His hair was silver and seemed to defy gravity, and he had a face mask on with his forehead protector covering his left eye. The man kept reading and then spoke up as a thought came to him. "So Kyuubi-sama, tell me, what is the relationship between the Biju and the human descendants of the sage?" Naruto blinked and looked up before looking at the man and then looking at the crystal ball. "You know, I am wonder about that myself." They heard a chuckle and then the ball glowed again before the voice of Kurama spoke from the ball. "Well, I guess you could say we are cousins of a sort. Or more like I'm an uncle and they are my nieces and nephews. Does that answer your question, Kakashi-san?" The man, Kakashi, looked up from his book and nodded. "For the most part. So since you are sealed within Naruto and he has begun to absorb your chakra, would that make him related to the other Biju?" Kurama chuckled and the ball flashed. "You know, for a human you are quite perceptive." Kakashi closed his eye in a eye smile before bowing his head. "Thanks," Kurama chuckled again. "You're welcome. And to answer your question, yes, he is. All Biju are siblings and their Jinchuriki are the same. In fact, to the others like Naruto, he is their brother." Kakashi nodded and looked back at his book. "Okay, thank you." Kurama chuckled and then fell silent again as Naruto moved another piece on the board. The next morning the sun filtered down upon the form of a blond young man who laid in a large 4-poster bed. Around the room were no signs of a child occupying it, yet its signs of an adult in the form of a neat and organized desk. A bookshelf that was alphabetized and no dirty laundry on the floor. As the light got brighter the boy groaned and sat up. He let out a yawn and stretched his arms. Naruto stared around him at what was once his parents' room. At first it had been weird staying in the room, but over time Naruto became accustomed to it and began to personalize it. He sighed and swung his feet over the bed and looked at the clock. "Still have a bit before I need to be at the academy. I bet they will be shocked to see me. Won't they, Kurama-san?" Within his mind Kurama opened one eye and smiled. "I would say so, kid, after all they all thought you failed." Naruto nodded and stood up and walked towards his dresser. "Well, better get dressed for the new day." A few minutes later found Naruto dressed in a new outfit with a sword strapped across his back. His outfit consisted of a black vest with red trim around it over a black t-shirt with the Uzumaki clan symbol of an orange spiral on the left shoulder and the Namikaze clan symbol of a red cross with a white diamond back plane. His pants were basic black shinobi pants and his sandals the same. His Konoha band was wrapped around his right bicep and his sword was strapped across his back. The sword was his most recent addition to his attire. Naruto looked at it, a slight smile on his face as he remembered finding it in the house. Flashback. Naruto sat at the desk in the giant library going over the many scrolls of jutsus that the two clans had. Currently he was reading over a scroll about a technique called futon, Suraisu Fu no Jutsu, wind release, slicing wind technique. The scroll said it was a Jonin-level futon technique, but that if the user was a student of Kenjutsu then they could channel the technique through their blade for a more powerful and controlled technique. Naruto sat back and frowned. What do you think, Kurama?" Kurama sat in his new forest thinking as he thought over the information the scroll had. "Well, kid, it is a good idea and that is a good technique to have under your belt. As for a sword, I know just the blade. Go to your clan's armory and I will direct you from there." Naruto stood up and ran out of the room and towards the building that was his clan's armory. Entering, he stopped and waited. "Okay, kid, go to the back left corner. There you will find a closed cabinet. The sword I suggest for you is in there." Naruto nodded again and went to the specified place to see that what Kurama described as a cabinet standing there. Naruto walked forward and grabbing the handles opened the doors to see the sword. Naruto froze as he stared at the blade before him. It was a katana, but there were some things that made it stand out. First, the handle was wrapped in black leather in a criss-cross pattern. Red underneath it made the diamonds that the black leather created stand out. The hilt was non-existent, instead the handle morphed into a fox's head that was open-mouthed, and from the mouth of the fox came the blade itself. The metal of the blade though was what really stood out. Sitting there shining like it had just been made was a blade made of pure black metal. Along the top half of the blade Naruto could make out a pattern of some kind. As he leaned closer he finally saw what it was. Traveling down the blade was what Naruto could only describe as a storm of nature. Fire sprouted from the fox's mouth that turned into lightning, that turned into water, that turned into earth and turned into air. Naruto stared at the blade for he didn't know how long before taking it off the shelf and holding it. Does it have a name? Kurama chuckled at the odd voice of the boy. Yes, it is called Genso Burrito, Element Blade. It was a gift to your mother from her father before she left Whirlpool. Naruto stared at the blade and then smiled. He reached in and grabbed the sheath that was made of black leather like the handle and placed the sword in it before smiling and turning to return to the library with a giant smile. Looks like I need to learn a kenjutsu style. End flashback. Naruto chuckled at the memory and turned towards his fridge to get something to eat, knowing that he had a long day ahead of him. Naruto sighed as he entered the academy and walked down the hall towards his classroom. He chuckled at the thought of his classmates' reaction to him being there and then frowned as he realized that they probably already knew due to their parents. He shrugged and kept walking, the thought not bothering him surprisingly. He finally reached the door to his classroom and stood in front of it. Getting cold feet, kid? Naruto chuckled. No, just nervous I guess. Once I walk through this door I become a full ninja. Kurama nodded within Naruto's mind. Quick question, kid? Naruto nodded. Go ahead. Kurama twitched his tails nervously and looked up at the towering trees. Will you tell your team about me? Naruto sighed and remained silent before nodding. Hi, I will. I won't hold that type of secret from them. Kurama nodded and sighed. Then do so with my blessing, kid. Naruto nodded and took another deep breath. Here we go, he thought. Opening the door, Naruto walked in and looked around. His many classmates looked up and stared at him. They all froze as they looked at him. Naruto chuckled and walked into the room, closing the door behind him, and walked over to where Sasuke was sitting before sitting down next to him. Hey Teme. Sasuke looked over at him and smiled. Hey Doob. Both turned and looked as they heard a loud thunk and looked to see about half of the class had just fell back in their chairs from a dead faint. Naruto chuckled and looked at Sasuke. Looks like they're surprised at us. Sasuke nodded. Can you blame them? I mean, think about how we acted in class towards each other. Naruto laughed and nodded. That's for sure. They never realized it was just that. An act. Both boys chuckled and looked up once again as a commotion was heard at the door. Naruto and Sasuke both sweat dropped as they saw Ino and Sakura arguing loudly in the doorway. Looks like your fan club's here, Naruto chuckled. Sasuke groaned and hid his head in his shirt, a bit like a dark-haired girl who at that moment walked up and smiled at the two boys. Hello Naruto-kun. Hello Sasuke-san. So you mind if I sit with you too? Both Naruto and Sasuke smiled at the girl and nodded. Of course Hinata, Sasuke said politely. Hinata smiled and took the seat next to Naruto as the two girls at the door stopped arguing and Sakura walked up. She went to speak and then stopped as she saw both Naruto and Hinata sitting with Sasuke. Naruto smiled and looked at Sasuke, an idea popping into his head. So Sasuke, after we are done for the day, want to meet up for ramen? Sasuke smiled and shook his head. You and ramen, I swear it's like an addiction. Naruto chucked at that and rubbed the back of his head as Sasuke nodded. Sure, why not? Want to join us, Hinata? Said girl blushed a little before nodding. Sure, I'd like tea, that. Naruto and Sasuke smiled at her before looking up to see Sakura with her jaw now on the ground and her eyes the size of dinner plates. She raised a shaking hand and pointed between Sasuke and Naruto. You two are friends, she stammered out. Sasuke and Naruto grinned and looked at each other before looking at her and at the same time answered her. Yep, Sakura just stared and then quickly with the voice she had become known for yelled out. How did that happen? You have always hated each other. Sasuke shook his head as Naruto laughed. Don't tell me you guys fell for that whole thing. Sakura and the entire class who at that point was listening in blinked and nodded. Well yeah, said a random student. You two are so different, why wouldn't you hate each other? Sasuke smirked and looked at Naruto. You tell them, Doob, I want to see their faces. Naruto smiled and looked at them. Well, it's like this. Flashback. Naruto stood in front of the Hokage's desk staring at the old man in shock and slight disbelief. What do you mean he's gone? He promised to help me get ready for the academy. Sarutobi sighed and pulled his hat down and looked out the window. It's complicated, Naruto, and you're too young to understand. Unfortunately for him, that was the wrong choice of words. Too young. Too young. I'm beaten and attacked 24/7 and I'm too young for the knowledge you have for me. What sort of fucked up logic is that, you old bastard? Sarutobi whipped his head around and stared at Naruto, who now stood with his fists clenched and was glaring at the Hokage with rage-filled eyes. Sarutobi sighed and then nodded. Fine, I will tell you. But I need to get someone else here first. Naruto nodded and sat down in the chair that he always used when he was there. Sarutobi snapped his fingers and an Anbu with a dog mask appeared. Dog, go get Sasuke-kun for us, would you? Dog nodded and disappeared in a swirl of leaves as Sarutobi turned to look at Naruto. I am sorry, Naruto, that was a poor choice of words on my part. Naruto shook his head and looked down guilty. No, Gigi, I shouldn't have yelled like that. I'm sorry. Sarutobi blinked in surprise before sitting back and staring at his adoptive grandson. You are full of surprises, Naruto-kun. To be so mature at such an age. But you had to grow too fast, didn't you? The two stayed like that until a knock at the door came and Sarutobi looked up. Come in. The door opened and a boy with black hair and eyes walked in and looked at the Hokage. You wanted to see me, sir? He asked in an emotionless voice. Sarutobi flinched at the voice and nodded. Yes, please sit down. I was just about to tell young Naruto-kun here about your brother. Sasuke looked at Naruto and Naruto at him. Naruto was the first to speak. Your brother told me a lot about you. You're lucky you had him as your brother. I wish he had been mine. He looked away sadly and Sasuke furrowed his brow and clenched his fists. I wish he wasn't my brother, he said quietly. Naruto was surprised and went to ask why when Sarutobi spoke up again. Please sit down, Sasuke, so I may tell Naruto what happened. Sasuke nodded and sat down as Sarutobi began to tell Naruto what happened to the Uchiha clan and Sasuke's brother Itachi's involvement. Naruto sat there at first startled and then his hands clenched into fists and started to shake all over his body. As Sarutobi finished, both him and Sasuke were staring at Naruto curiously at his reaction. It wasn't what they expected. I'll kill him, that hypocrite. All he preached about was loyalty to clan and village, and he goes and does this. He is scum. No, he is worse than scum. He is unforgivable. Sasuke sat watching and listening to Naruto, his eyes wide in amazement. Here was someone who shared in his hate for his brother and wanted him dead as much as him. Sarutobi just sat there and waited for Naruto to finish. He was used to such outbursts. Naruto was loyal to a fault. It was something that amazed Sarutobi and made him smile. No matter what the village threw at him, he was the loyal Konoha. He mentally smiled at his surrogate grandson and watched as Naruto calmed down. As Naruto calmed down, Sasuke decided to ask him something. How did you know my brother? Naruto looked at him. His mind was still in turmoil, but he answered anyway. Itachi was helping my train to defend myself against the villagers. He was teaching me what he could about the ninja ways. Sasuke blinked in surprise and then a glare came to his face. He never helped train me. Naruto's eyes widened and then he clenched his fists again and looked down, his mind racing, and then looked up, determination in his eyes. He looked at Sasuke and nodded. Then I will teach you everything he taught me. Sasuke's eyes widened and then he smiled. It was more of a smirk, but to him it was a smile. Okay, that sounds like a plan. Sarutobi sat back, eyes wide in shock and amazement at the two boys in front of him. In truth, he was going to try to encourage a friendship between the two of them, but this was much better. They barely know each other and already they are becoming allies. Allies in the goal to take down Itachi yet, but that is the first thing they have in common. I would bet money that in time those two will become like brothers. End flashback. And since then me and Sasuke have hung out and getting to know each other. Yeah, I call him Teme, and he calls me Doob, but it's more of a joke between us than insults. Sort of like nicknames, Naruto said as he finished his story to the class. Everyone stared in shock except of Naruto, Sasuke and Hinata. The girl had heard the story when she started to train with both boys after Naruto invited Sasuke over to join them in training. Sakura was about to speak when the door opened again and Iruka walked in. Alright everyone, please take your seats and we will begin. Sakura sighed and walked up to sit next to Kiba, who placed a hand on her shoulder reassuringly and then looked at Naruto. Who are you, Uzumaki? The next 3 hours was spent listening to Iruka give speeches about what it meant to be a ninja and one's duties. Naruto sat back, his eyes closed in meditation. He would have remained that way had Iruka not stopped talking and started to get serious. Okay everyone, I think I bored you enough now. Sorry, but I had to get one last lecture in before you all left me. Naruto opened his eyes and smiled. It's okay, Ni-san. Just hurry up and tell us who our teammates and senseis are. Everyone nodded and Iruka smirked at his brother before picking up a paper and nodding. Okay, then here are the team assignments. Team 1. Teams 1 to 6 are unimportant as only teams 7 to 10 go past the Chunin exams. Okay, now team 7 will be Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Naruto smiled. Sasuke Uchiha. A smirk and an exchange of smiles between the two boys. And Hinata Hyuga. At that there was a sudden silence and then an ear-screeching noise as every female aside from Hinata screeched at the top of their lungs. No. Would you all shut up and sit down? The Hokage set up these teams and that is the end of it. Iruka yelled while his head suddenly swelled up 3 times its normal size. Iruka sighed and continued. You will be trained by Kakashi Hatake. Now team 8 is Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Abruma, and Sakura Haruno. You will be led by Kurenai Yuhi. The rest are same as canon. Iruka looked up at the class as he finished saying the last team. Okay everyone, go have lunch and then come back to meet up with your new senseis. Everyone quickly got up and filed out to eat lunch outside. As the new genin of Konoha were learning their teams, Sarutobi Hiruzen sat in front of the council sighing and rubbing his temples. Lord Hokage, you cannot seriously have placed that demon on the same team as Sasuke-kun. Yelled a green-haired woman who was a member of the civilian council. Sarutobi glared at her and shook his head. Yes, I did place Naruto-kun on the same team as Sasuke-kun. Unbeknownst to the council, Naruto and Sasuke have known each other for years and have developed a close bond. In fact, I asked them what they would do if I placed them on separate teams and they both almost put a kunai through my head at the notion. He chuckled at the memory and looked up. But Hokage-sama, that boy is a demon. You cannot seriously be considering letting him become a ninja? Sarutobi went to respond when a hand slammed down on the table and everyone looked to see Hiyashi Hyuga glaring at the person who had spoke. Need I remind you that Naruto-sama is the son of Minato Namikaze, the 4th Hokage. As such, he is the last of his clan just like Sasuke is. And not only that, but he is also the last known Uzumaki alive. Have you forgotten who that clan is to Konoha? If so, look down at the table and remember. He said, pointing at the council table that had the large Uzumaki swirl on it with the Konoha leaf symbol on top of that. You ought to show proper respect to him as is his right as the last of 2 great clans. The civilian scoffed and glared at the Hyuga. Really? I don't believe for an instance that that demon is the son of the 4th. I say he faked everything and has warped all your minds. At that, Sarutobi stood up and slammed his fist on his desk and released a sudden burst of ki, killing intent. Enough. I have had it with you civilians interfering in ninja matters. The only reason you had any say in Naruto's life before was because he was among the civilians due to his orphan status. Well, now he is a ninja and a member of 2 of the most powerful of ninja clans and as such falls outside your rights to say anything about him. Now sit down and shut your mouth. And so help me, if I hear any of you call him a demon one more time, I will send you to Ibiki after throwing you out that window, and not even Kami will stop me. The civilians paled and those standing up sat down quickly. Sarutobi sighed and then sat down. Good, now where were we? It was a few hours later and all the genin teams had been picked up by their jonin senseis. All but one. I am gonna kill you, Kakashi. Naruto growled as he stood leaning against the wall near the window. Sasuke looked at him and frowned. Why? Naruto looked at him. Because when he came over for a little while last night and never told me he was gonna be our sensei. And 2, because he is 3 hours late. Given the option I would so. He stopped and a devilish smirk came across his face. Hey Sasuke, remember those element seals I started making last week? Sasuke nodded, wondering what that had to do with this. Then his eyes widened and he gained a grin equal to Naruto's. Do it. Naruto chuckled and stood up and walked over to the door. Hinata watched him, a slight smile on her face. After hanging out with both boys she had developed a small like for pranks. In truth she had always enjoyed the pranks Naruto had pulled. But his newest ones were even better as he used seals and other ninja arts to pull them off. Naruto pulled out a brush and some special chakra ink and placed a seal on the floor in the doorway right where their sensei would have to step. Then placing his palm on it he channeled a small bit of electric chakra into it. Enough to cause a bit of paralysis. Then he stepped back and repeated the process before he returned to his spot against the wall after closing the door. Now we wait. It was only a few minutes later that they heard footsteps heading towards their room and the door opened. Naruto smiled as a foot stepped right on the seal and a loud yell was heard as their sensei fell forward, his entire body frozen stiff in paralysis. He lifted his eyes up to look at his team and then spoke up. "My first impression of you. You're a clever bunch to set this trap." Then he poofed into smoke and suddenly walked into the room reading an orange book that Naruto recognized. But not clever enough. Naruto smirked and both Hinata and Sasuke started to laugh. Kakashi looked at them frowning. "What's so funny?" Naruto grinned and pointed down at Kakashi's feet. Said man looked down and his one visible eye widened as he saw a seal appear beneath him. "Oh, that's why," he said before the seal activated and he was frozen in place by the electricity. Naruto then let go of his laughter and started to roll on the floor laughing as his plan worked. Kakashi just eyes smiled as he tried to move and spoke up. "Very good, now everyone go to the top to the Hokage building and I will meet you there." Naruto got up still laughing and walked out followed closely by Hinata and Sasuke. Naruto stopped and looked at Kakashi. "That should wear off in about 30 minutes. See you then, sensei." With that him and his new team left heading towards their meeting spot as Kakashi smiled to himself. This will be fun, he thought as he waited for the seal to wear off. 40 minutes later found the four of them on top of the Hokage tower looking out over the village. Kakashi looked at them and smiled. "Okay, to start let's get to know one another. Tell us all your name, likes, dislikes, hobbies, and dreams." He pointed at Naruto and I smiled. "You first, Whiskers." Naruto smirked and stood up. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. My likes are ramen, foxes, training, and learning. My dislikes are traitors, liars, perverts, the time it takes to cook ramen and anyone who judges someone for something that's out of their control. My hobbies are training, developing new jujitsu, and meditating. My dream is to become a better Hokage than my father, revive both the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans or merge them into one clan. One day have a family, and kill 2 specific people." Kakashi stared at him slightly stunned at what he had said. Well, some of that was a surprise and some of that was completely new. I wonder who he wants to kill. He turned and looked at Hinata. "Okay, Jacket, your go." Naruto and Sasuke sent him glares for teasing her, but Kakashi ignored it, or at least appeared to, when in fact he was thinking note to self. "Don't insult or tease Hinata if I value my life." Hinata stood up and began speaking. "My name is Hinata Hyuga. My likes are training, friends, and dogs. My dislikes are bats, people who are mean to others, perverts, and the color pink. My hobbies are gardening, birdwatching, and studying new things. My dream is to one day lead my clan well and get rid of the caged bird seal that is placed on the branch family of my clan." Kakashi nodded again, surprises there. I remember her profile saying that she was shy and unconfident. I wonder what changed that. Was it an act like Naruto and Sasuke, or has something given her confidence? He pointed at Sasuke next. "Okay, Emo, your go." Once again he got glares, but this time from all 3 of them. He appeared to ignore them, but like last time thought differently. Okay, so they all defend and look out for each other. Seems they know each other pretty well. Sasuke didn't stand up and just placed his hands under his chin, like in the anime, manga. "My likes are training and being with my friends," he said, glancing at Naruto and Hinata, something that Kakashi noted. "My dislikes are many and my only hobby is training. My dream is to revive the Uchiha clan and kill a certain person." Kakashi nodded once again, a slight surprise. "And have a feeling I know who he wants to kill." I wonder if that is one of the people Naruto wants to kill. I will have to speak to the Hokage about this." I smiling Kakashi nodded and stood up. "Okay, my name is Kakashi Hitaki. My likes are none of your concern, as are my dislikes. My hobbies don't have any, and as for my dreams, well, we will get back to that." I smiled and quickly moved his head as 3 kunai flew past him. Again, note to self, don't taunt them like that if I want to live. With that he stood up and clapped his hands together. Okay then guys, with that meet me at training ground 7 tomorrow at 7. He stood up to leave and then stopped. Oh, and don't eat breakfast, you'll just throw up. With that said he disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Naruto chuckled and shook his head. Hinata looked at him frowning. What's funny? Naruto smiled at her. Simple. My father did that same thing when he was Kakashi Sensei's sensei. Go ahead and eat breakfast tomorrow guys, and let's meet at 6:30 instead of 7. If he's late again I will deal with him. The two of them nodded and took off towards their respective homes as Naruto turned and stared up at the statue of his father. Hope I do you proud, Dad. Because when the time comes I am gonna surpass you. With that he turned and headed home. Kakashi stood on a roof overlooking everything and smiled. Naruto is a lot like Sensei. A born leader. He looked up at the face of his sensei and smiled before turning to go report to the Hokage. Naruto sat in the center courtyard of his home with his eyes closed as he meditated. Or at least that's how it seemed. In reality he was actually undergoing training from Kurama. The fox had decided that as his host Naruto should learn all the skills and techniques of the kitsunes and foxes. And also learn about the true nature of the biju. And to teach him that knowledge he had Naruto enter into his mindscape so as to learn from the great fox himself. Naruto's mindscape. Naruto sat in the clearing he had made for Kurama. He wasn't wearing his usual black and red attire. Instead he was clothed in black and red robes similar to the robes of priests in a distant land. Sijic robes in Skyrim. Before him sat Kurama in his full size. The great fox was looking down at Naruto and telling him about the reason that the biju were actually made. You know kid how us biju came to be, but you don't know why. At our creation the sage of the 6 paths gave each of us a task that we were to each undertake. He also delegated out to us where we would live and protect. Naruto nodded and continued to listen. As you know I was given here the forest surrounding Konohagakure. The one tail, Shukaku, was given the desert of Sanagakure. He was tasked with containing the desert in place and not allowing it to roam and ravage the land. Next was the 2 tails, Matabi, of Kumogakure. She was given the task of controlling the fires of the wild and not letting them ravage the world. Then there is the 3 tails, Isobu, of Kirigakure. He was the master of water and tasked with guardianship of the seas. He paused and checked to make sure that Naruto was still listening. When he saw that he continued. Next is the 4 tails, Son Goku, of Iwagakure. He was the guardian of the beasts keeping watch over the many and the few. Next is the 5 tails, Kakuo, of Iwagakure. His task was to spread joy. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that and Kurama laughed. Yes, I know, a strange task, but you see he was based of a horse and dolphin when the sage made him, and they are 2 of the most playful animals in the world, so he was tasked with spreading joy. Naruto shrugged and waited for Kurama to continue. Now the 6 tails, Seiken, of Kirigakure. She was tasked with the purpose of healing. A task she passed on to her many children. Naruto frowned as he thought of that. So the slug contract? Kurama nodded. Correct. Those slugs are the descendants of Seiken. Naruto nodded and Kurama continued on. Next is the 7 tails, Chome, of Takigakure. She was tasked with controlling the insects of the world. Once again something passed on to certain beings. Naruto nodded. The Abruma. Kurama nodded. Among others, yes. Now next we have the 8 tails, Yuki, of Kumogakure. He was tasked with helping the land grow and change. Kurama stopped and sighed before he finished his lecture. And finally there is me. The 9 tails. I was given the task of governing my brethren and also given the additional task of ensuring that the lands of nature remain unblemished. Naruto looked at him and nodded. So that's why you're here. Konoha is surrounded by the largest forest in the world, as such you are guarding it. Kurama nodded. Yes, but I am also here because this is the best place for me to connect to nature and use pure nature chakra. Naruto frowned. Nature chakra? Kurama nodded. Yes, nature chakra, but that is a lesson for later. Right now someone is approaching, so you had best go. Outside. Naruto opened his eyes to see his courtyard. He was once again in his customary outfit. Sighing, he stood up and stretched his back and let out a groan as his spine popped back into place. He looked up to see it was almost night. Better see who's here and then go to bed. Kakashi-sensei probably has something big planned. Sighing, he walked into his home and headed towards the door. Well, let's see who's here, he thought as he opened the door. The person at the door let out a quick yelp and jumped back as the door in front of them opened right as they were about to knock. Naruto stared at the person standing on his doorstep and was surprised at who he saw. Standing on his porch was one of the 4 ice queens of Konoha. Her black hair and full figure was a common sight among the women of the village, but it was her ruby-red eyes that gave away who she was. Kurenai, the genjutsu mistress of Konoha, and the love interest of Asuma Sarutobi. Naruto blinked in surprise before speaking. Evening, Kurenai-san. What brings you here at this late hour? Kurenai blinked in surprise at his words, before shaking her head and smiling. Well, I was wondering if you would like to join me and a few friends of mine for dinner tonight at our favorite restaurant. To say Naruto was surprised would be an understatement. Sure, let me just grab my things and I can go. He stepped to the side and held the door open. Why don't you come in and relax while I get ready? Kurenai smiled and nodded. Thank you, she said as she walked into his house. Naruto closed the door and quickly rushed upstairs to get ready. Kurenai looked around the room she was in that acted as the entryway for the house. Pretty tidy for a kid, especially one like Naruto. But if Kakashi and Sume were telling us the truth, there is a lot more to that kid than he let us think. She turned to look at the staircase that said Blonde had taken. Wonder if they will stick him in the CRA? With Naruto sighed as he went through his closet before picking out an outfit. Quickly throwing it on, he grabbed his money pouch, which he had replaced from his old green frog to a black pouch with Red Fox's head stitched on it. He tucked it into one of the pockets on the vest he wore and then grabbed his gear bag. He knew he wouldn't need it, but he always took it with him. Especially as it had sealed away supplies also in it. Better to have it and not need it, than need it and not have it, he thought as he scoured the room for anything else he may need. He went to walk out the door when he froze and turned to the only piece of fancy furniture in his room. A polished cherry wood sword rack with a single sword placed on it. Walking over to it, he grabbed the sword and thought about taking it. I do want it to become a part of my daily routine. And it does match all of my outfits. He got quiet as he thought when suddenly Kurama spoke up from within his mind. Take it with you, Kit. Naruto blinked in surprise. Oh, do you mind me asking why? Kurama shrugged from within the clearing he had been teaching Naruto in. Call it a gut feeling. I think you should keep that sword on you at all times. Something tells me that it's important. Naruto nodded and with no hesitation strapped the sword to his back. Sounds good to me, he replied as he turned and headed towards the stairs. As Naruto started down the stairs, he stopped as he saw Kurenai bent over looking at a picture of both of his parents sitting in the forest. His eyes roved over her body and he couldn't help the smile that come to his face. She's no Hinata, but she is beautiful. And she is an illusion master. A perfect mate for a kitsune. Naruto blushed as Kurama spoke and with a slight growl sent a sudden torrent of rain down of the laughing fox. He quickly stopped laughing. Naruto sighed and tried to clear his head before his nose started to bleed from all the mental images that Kurama's words had made pop up. Okay, that probably just ruined a perfect night out with a very wise woman. He mentally face-palmed at that. Oh man, I got to stop this. Taking a deep breath, he started down the stairs, loudly so as to alert her he was coming. Kurenai stood up as she heard Naruto coming down. She smirked to herself as she saw him blush while looking at her and then quickly look away. Maybe tonight will be funner than I thought, she thought, mentally licking her lips. Naruto coughed and motioned towards the door. Lead the way, he said as he turned towards her smiling. The blush still hadn't left his face. Kurenai smiled and stepped out the door. Her grin widening as she calmly swayed her hips as she walked in front of him and looked over her shoulder at him. Coming, Naruto-kun? She asked with a slight purr in her voice. Naruto stared at her and couldn't help the fact that his blush was now a very deep red. In his mind, Kurama was on the floor holding his sides fighting for breath as he rolled around laughing at his companion. Oh my god, Kit, I can't believe this. That smoking hot vixen is flirting with you. If I hadn't just seen it, I wouldn't have believed it. Naruto groaned and unconsciously yelled at the fox out loud. Will you shut up, you stupid furball? How about you go chase some rabbits and leave me alone, or I will send another storm your way. That quickly got Kurama to stop laughing. He turned and saw Kurenai staring at him, a smile on her face. I see that Kyuubi-san has an opinion on something. she said with a slight smirk before walking away, still swaying her hips, and this time Naruto followed. I know I'm gonna regret this, but I just can't help myself, he thought. Kurenai led Naruto through the village until they arrived at a very familiar place to Naruto. The barbecue joint. Guess even the higher-ups enjoy this place, he thought as he followed the ruby-eyed woman inside. Walking in, Naruto saw that tonight the place was pretty full. He noticed a few familiar faces among the crowd but ignored them for a group of 6 that sat talking at the large table Kurenai was walking towards. Naruto followed her and looked at who he would be joining. To say he was surprised would be an understatement. Sitting at the table were the 3 other members of the Konoha Ice Queens: Anko Mitarashi, Hana Inuzuka, and Hyuga Izuki. The other 3 members of the group were all men. Asuma Sarutobi sat next to an empty chair in between him and Anko. Next to him was Iruka, and finally there was Kakashi sitting there reading a book. Naruto was surprised it wasn't his usual smut book. Kurenai walked around the table and took the seat next to Asuma as Naruto walked up and leaned against the last remaining chair. So what, may I ask, brought you to invite me here? He asked the group. Iruka turned and smiled at him, his eyes closing as he answered. Well, me and Kakashi invited you so that you could enjoy some company tonight. Asuma invited you because he wanted to meet someone that caught Shikamaru's attention like you did. And as for the girls, there he trailed off and sent a fearful glance at the 4 women before gulping. Well, how about they tell you why? Naruto turned to look at the woman and froze in place as he saw the looks on their faces. Each had a smile that would have sent the great Kyuubi running for the hills. In fact, said Kyuubi was currently burrowing his way beneath the great forest that Naruto had made, calling over his shoulder as he dug. Sorry kid, but you're on your own. When a vixen has that type of look, all males know to run for it. Naruto gulped and looked at them. So ladies, what is your reason for asking me here? He hesitantly asked. The girls all grinned wider and the snake mistress Anko leaned forward and started to speak. Well, Gaki, first we wanted to see what all the new girls out of the academy were yapping about when talking about you, and from what I'm seeing they actually were telling the truth for once, she said, licking her lips while giving Naruto a predatory grin that sent shivers down his spine, and not the pleasurable kind. Hana leaned back in her seat and eyed him up and down like a piece of meat before adding her input. We also wanted to see if it was true that you were hiding your abilities from everyone like those 3 men there say you have been, she said, eyeing him still. And since your demeanor has changed, your outfit is much more professional, your attitude, way of speaking and posture has become more mature, and you are carrying what seems to be a professionally crafted blade on your back with the ease of a master, I would say that is an understatement. Your mask was foolproof. Naruto nodded and looked at the 2 remaining women and watched as Kurenai leaned forward, purposely positioning herself so that her impressive assets were showing before speaking. Well, Naruto-kun, she said, purring the kun part. Naruto sent a fearful apologetic glance at Asuma, knowing that he was into the woman. The man nodded and sighed. Naruto got the impression that the kunoichi did this a lot. Kurenai continued as this happened, ignoring the 2 men. I wanted to see if you were anything like your parents, and, she paused and looked him up and down, you don't disappoint, she said, licking her lips like Anko. Naruto once again sent a look Asuma's way, only this time it was a plea for help. Asuma just grinned, and sent his own look back that said, it's your fault for being a ladies' man. Naruto gulped and turned to the final girl of the group. Hyuga looked at him, her smile still in place, but now Naruto saw that unlike the others it wasn't a smile that promised unpleasant things. No, this one was of kindness and care. I invited you because I thought you might like to meet one of your other guardians that has always had your back, she said, pulling up her shirt sleeve to show a tattoo on her left arm. Naruto instantly recognized it as the mark of an Anbu and nodded, smiling back at her. The woman smiled, then turned into a grin that matched Anko and Kurenai's, and Naruto shivered again. Plus, I wanted to see what changes you made after graduating the academy. She licked her lips, and Naruto realized that if he was going to survive the night he probably needed to leave fast. He looked at the group of them and cast quick glances at the men, using the unspoken language of the eye that all men could use. He told them his plan and got acknowledgement that they would help him. Then without even any hesitation quickly formed a hand sign and cast a jutsu. Suddenly in front of them were 5 other Narutos. The 4 women all blinked in surprise and growled as one. The Narutos smiled and with a wave of their hands smiled and said, See ya. Before turning and running off out of the building. The four women growled and jumped up and as one raced after the five Narutos. Not even noticing a sixth Naruto standing on the ceiling watching the whole thing. With a sigh of relief, Naruto jumped down from the ceiling and looked at the other men. If you need me, I will be at home. See you tomorrow, Kakashi-sensei. Kakashi nodded, waving, not looking up from his book. Naruto went to leave, but Asuma asked him a question before he could. Naruto, what will happen to your clones when the women catch them? Naruto smiled at him and rubbed the back of his head. Well, I put enough chakra into each for about 10 clones, so they will last quite a while and stand a good beating before dispelling. So I guess the women will do what they planned to do to me to them. Asuma chuckled and both Kakashi and Iruka started to laugh. Naruto frowned. What's so funny? Iruka waved him off. You'll find out soon enough. Just remember to tell us about it when you do. Naruto frowned at that but shrugged and left the restaurant. He heard a few chuckles as he went from the guys and a few comments of, poor sap doesn't know what he just did. He frowned at that but ignored it and headed home. He heard the frustrated screams of four women and smiled. That's what you get for messing with Naruto Uzumaki. 4 hours later, Naruto's room was quiet aside from the sound of the crickets outside as he laid sleeping in peace. His face held a smile as his dreams passed through his mind. Suddenly, though, his face scrunched up and his mouth opened as he let out a moan that filled the entire empty estate before he awoke with a sudden yell, grabbing his sheets as his body shuddered with what he was dealing with. As the sudden assault ended, he laid panting in bed, staring at the ceiling, eyes wide as the memories from his clones ran through his mind again and again. He looked down at his blanket and groaned before standing up and throwing it in the dirty linen hamper and walking towards the shower. I am so getting them back for this, he said to himself. And Kakashi-sensei will be first during our special training. He growled as he slammed the door to the shower. In his mind, Kurama laid groaning as the effects of Naruto's memories washed through him and he let out a very perverted smile. Kit, if you don't go after those vixens, I am going to kill you, he said as he drifted off to sleep, ignoring the sounds of Naruto sputtering and cursing. Naruto groaned as the sun hit his face, awakening him for the second time that morning. Glancing over at his clock, he saw that he still had 2 hours before he was supposed to meet the team and sighed with relief. Means I can get woken up first and plan out my revenge on Sensei, he thought. He heard Kurama grumble about ungrateful humans but ignored it. Sitting up, Naruto stretched out his arms and then reached back and scratched the back of his head. As his nails touched his skin, he yelped out and pulled them away. Looking down, he was surprised to see that his nails had turned into claws. He blinked a few times as the knowledge settled in his brain and then, quote, "What the fuck happened to my hand?" he yelled out, jumping out of his bed. Looking at his other hand, he saw that the same had happened there as well. With a growl, he closed his eyes and entered his mind where a still slumbering Kurama laid. Naruto, growling and wanting some answers, raised one of his now clawed hands and swiped said claws across the large nose of the fox. Kurama yelped and then reared his head back as he roared in surprise and slight pain. Looking down, he saw Naruto standing there glaring up at him, growling. He went to ask what was his problem when he blinked and re-looked at the boy. Closing his eyes, he rubbed them and looked at the boy again. Oh shit, he thought. Naruto was still unaware of it, but not only had his hands changed but a few other features had as well. His ears were now more pointed and had their edges covered in a blonde fur similar to his hair. His hair was now much longer and had kept its spiky look. His two already longer and shaper than normal canines were now protruding out of his mouth like fangs. There were the clawed hands, and finally the thing that really got the great fox was the 3 swaying foxtails that were lashing around, showing the boy's anger behind him. Kurama stared at the boy for a second before grinning hesitantly and rubbing the back of his head. A nice look you got going, Naruto. Love the tails, he said, rubbing the back of his head. His ears laid low and tails curled in on one another, looking like one big tail. Naruto growled and then froze and looked behind him to see the 3 tails swaying there. He growled again and started to check the rest of his body and found the other changes to him. He growled and took a deep breath before looking at Kurama, who was looking fearfully at the boy. Explain. Kurama gulped and put his hands together, trying to figure out how to explain what had happened. The worst part about it, though, was that he had no idea how it had happened. To be honest, I don't really know what happened. Naruto growled, his tails lashing and his claws flexing. Well then give me some theories. Because I cannot go out looking like this without something to tell people. Kurama frowned and placed his hand on his chin. I'm trying to kit but I'm getting a blank. You see you're displaying traits of a Hanyu. Or half-demon. But a Hanyu can only be born between a human and demon. But you are 100% human, so that's not it. He frowned and then shrunk down to his horse size and started to walk around the boy, sniffing him. You still smell like you, only now your fox scent is more pronounced. Not only that, but you're giving off a... He froze and looked at Naruto again, his eyes widening and his mouth forming an O shape. Naruto frowned. He knew that face well. After all, he had gotten it more than once when he did something surprising. Whatever happened to him, the fox hadn't expected it to happen. What? He asked, his anger now fading. Kurama sat up again and scratched his chin. Tell me, Naruto. How do you feel about the fact that Kurenai, Hana, Anko, and Hyuga are seeing other men? Naruto frowned at the question and went to say that it didn't matter when suddenly his claws flexed longer, his hair spiked even more, and his tail started to lash angrily as he let a deep growl enter his throat. Kurama nodded and held up his hands. Pause. Really, what are they? I always wondered. Calm down, kid, it was a test. I think I have a possible theory now. Naruto growled but did as he was told and calmed down and looked up at the fox. Talk, he said, still a little pissed at the thought of his girls being with other men. Kurama sighed and looked at him. My theory is this. Due to the nature of our link and your personality, when the girls and your clones did what they did, he said, trying not to antagonize the boy and more than necessary. The demonic chakra that was already flowing through you was pumped up and started to get into your very DNA. Due to this you have gained Hanyu traits and Kitsune traits. Naruto frowned and then shook his head. Great, so due to me having a giant demon fox in me and then going and having, I am not what is considered in fact a demon. Kurama blinked at his tone that rang with not only aggravation but also fear. Well yes, that is correct. Naruto groaned and sat down, his head in his clawed hands. Great, just great. Now I really am what those villagers called me. He sighed and looked at the fox. Is there any way for me to turn human again? Kurama nodded. Of course. All Hanyus had two forms. Their demon form that you are now in and their human form. And unlike a henge that can wear off over time, the forms are 100% real. All you need to do is think of your human form and you will return to it. Naruto nodded and taking a deep breath did what he was told and thought of his old self, and as he did his form shifted back. He sighed in relief and stood up but frowned when he felt different than normal. Kurama watched him and smiled. You're probably wondering why you feel different. Naruto nodded. Well, you see, when a Hanyu gains its Hanyu form, either like you did, or in battle, or just plain old puberty, their bodies undergo a change. Your sense are now heightened to be about the same as the best Inuzukas, your strength has doubled as has your speed. And you now have even more chakra than before. But don't worry, you still have the same level of control over it. The change is natural. Naruto nodded and rubbed his forehead. Okay, now explain why I suddenly want to kill Asuma-sensei and Iruka-nichan. Kurama chuckled and looked at him. Well, you see, foxes are possessive of everything. So if you mate with a vixen, they're yours in your mind, and if another man is with them, your instincts tell you to kill them for touching or looking at your vixens. Naruto groaned. So in other words, I pretty much just made those women my mates. Kurama nodded. Yeah, pretty much, he said, grinning. Naruto sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Oh, Kakashi-sensei is so getting dealt with after this. Kurama chuckled and nodded. Well, you better go and get ready, kid. Time's awaiting. Naruto nodded and left his mind space. Kurama sat there thinking as he turned and looked towards the clearing in the mine that held that cabin he had found and its single occupant. I wonder if this is because of you? He said out loud. 2 hours later found Naruto sitting on one of the 3 wooden posts in Training Ground 7. His other teammates were not there yet, but Naruto could feel them walking towards the spot. He sighed and looked up at the sunny sky. As his 2 teammates and friends entered the area, he looked to see that they both looked to have gotten a full night's sleep. He on the other hand lifted his thermos full of coffee and took a long swig of the drink to help him wake up. Hinata walked up to him smiling, he Norseman, showing her excitement. Naruto looked at her and suddenly a strange sense of guilt raced through him. He blinked in surprise at that and wondered what that was about. It's because you see her as your alpha mate and you have yet to claim her, and yet you just finished claiming 4 other mates last night. Kurama spoke up in his mind. Naruto nodded in understanding. It made sense to him and he knew he needed to ignore the guilt. He and Hinata had nothing just as him and the Ice Queens had nothing. Shaking his head he smiled at her and waved tiredly. "Morning Hina-chan," he said using his nickname for her. Hinata blinked and frowned, a worried look crossed her face. "Are you okay Naru-kun, you seem tired." Sasuke walking up to them stopped at that and looked at his friend. "Brother. Now that she mentions it, you do look dead Dobi. What happened to you last night?" Naruto turned away and wasn't going to answer when four voices spoke at the same time answering for him. "Oh, nothing much, he just made four women scream his name with pleasure last night." Naruto whipped his head around and glared at the four women that now walked towards him and his team. Inside his fox side was happy to see them, but the human part of him was anything but. "What do you want?" he growled out, not looking at them or Hinata, who was staring at him with a look of what seemed to be hurt. "No, it can't be hurt, I'm imaging things." The women frowned at that and looked at him. "We came to see how you were doing after last night. Your clones dispelled after we had each fallen asleep." Naruto growled, his hands shaking as he kept his eyes averted from them. It was much easier to be angry when he wasn't able to see them. "Well, you have seen me and you can obviously tell how I am. Now can you leave?" He growled out, his voice going deep as he tried to hold back his fox side's urges to look at his mates. Kurama spoke to him, trying to comfort him. "Naruto, you can't fight it. Just look at them and learn to deal with this new part of you. What happened happened, and you can't change that." Naruto growled but realized the fox was right and he turned and looked at the four women. He looked at them and saw that they had looks of hurt on their faces. Naruto growled and began to crush his thermos in his hands. "Please don't look at me like that," he whispered, looking down. His fox side told him to lay back his ears, curl his tail under him and bare his throat to appease his mates. He didn't like seeing them like this, and his own natural need to comfort and help people didn't help. "If you don't want us to look at you like this, then explain why you seem angry and sad." Naruto recognized the voice of Hana and groaned as he put his thermos down and put his face in his hands. He looked at them and then looked at his teammates, trying to figure out what to say. "Okay, first, I am angry because what happened last night is not something I wanted to happen. I was wanting to wait for a bit before doing that, and I wanted my first to be someone important to me," he said, casting a glance at Hinata, who gained a small understanding smile, yet Naruto could still see some hurt and he wondered why. As for the sad part, he trailed off and looked at his teammates again before continuing. "Thanks to my condition." He looked to see that the women understood and his friends were confused. "I have traits that affect me in both physical and psychological ways. Due to last night I can't look at you without certain thought, and you don't want to know what happened when I thought about Asuma and Iruka this morning." He saw both Kurenai and Anko's eyes widened at his subtle hint on their lovers. All four women looked at him and then at each other before they nodded and looked at him. "Naruto, we want to apologize for what has happened. We ask that you forgive us and we will go back to things like we have never met." Naruto sighed and shook his head. "You are forgiven, but I am afraid things will never be the same between us." He looked at them and then decided to be a bit more forthcoming. "Foxes are very possessive of their mates and will do anything to keep them." The women's eyes opened at his phrase and what it meant. Kurenai looked at him and saw in his eyes a sadness that stemmed from this, but at the same time there was a joy there. She recognized that joy. She had it once before when she first fell in love. It was the joy of being with someone. Someone who wanted to be with you and share moments with you. She frowned and thought of Asuma. She really did care for him and wanted to honestly be with him. But now, Anko and Hyuga were thinking along the same lines. The girls exchanged glances and nodded. "Naruto, we need to think about this. We are sorry, but it's going to be a while before we can talk again." Naruto nodded and sighed with relief. "Good," he said. That one word spoke more than a single sentence. The women nodded and all but one of them turned and left. Naruto looked up to see who had remained behind. Hana Inuzuka stood there looking at him with a strange look on her face. "Naruto, when you are done for today, come by my family's compound. I need to talk to you." Naruto nodded, wondering what she would say, and watched as the last of the Ice Queens left. Naruto groaned and looked at his teammates. Hinata wouldn't look at him and Sasuke just had a smirk on his face. Finally the black-haired boy smiled and spoke. "So did you do them all at once or take turns?" Naruto groaned and placed his head in his hands. He looked up to see Hinata still looking away from him and shuddering a bit. He instantly recognized the signs of someone crying. Getting up off the pole, he walked towards her and without warning wrapped his arms around her and pulled her against him. A startled, choked-out gasp was the response before she turned around and buried her head in his chest. Her body shook as she let tear after tear fall. Naruto frowned at her reaction. He was having a hard time believing what he was seeing. She actually cares about me the same way I care about her. In his mind he heard Kurama give him some advice and Naruto mentally nodded before slightly pulling away from Hinata and lifting her chin. Hinata looked at him, tears running down her face. Naruto looked at her smiling. "Please don't cry, Toyotomi. I hate to see you cry." Hinata gasped at what Naruto had called her and for the first time in little over a week felt her face heat up with a blush and her knees wobble. "No, it can't be. He didn't call me. Hime." She was on the verges of passing out when she gasped again as Naruto leaned forward and planted a kiss to her forehead. That was the last click for her and her eyes rolled up as she passed out with a smile on her face. Sasuke rolled his eyes but smiled at his friend. Just couldn't resist, could y'all love her boy. Naruto smiled at him and laid Hinata down on the ground, folding up his vest to act as a pillow. "You know how I feel about her. I had to let her know so that way she wouldn't hate me." Sasuke smiled and walked over to him. "You really are upset over this whole thing, aren't you?" Naruto nodded. "Yeah." Sasuke nodded and frowned. "What condition were you talking about to those women?" Naruto sighed and looked up. "Later, after we have finished here. I will tell both you and Hinata. But not now." Sasuke nodded and turned and sat down at one of the other poles. 3 hours later found the four of them all smiling over the figure of their sensei as he laid on the ground bound in ninja while his hair standing on end and paralyzed from the neck down. Naruto got an evil gleam in his eyes as he gazed at the man. "That was for being late, sensei," he said, drawing out the sensei part. "I am still working on a proper punishment for last night. Especially after this morning." Kakashi looked at him. "What happened this morning?" He stopped and looked to the side, his eyes showing that he was grinning in a perverted way. "Besides you having the biggest wet dream this side of the planet." Naruto narrowed his eyes and both Sasuke and Hinata suddenly released a wave of ki at him. Naruto knelt down and using his body as a shield transformed one of his hands, showing Kakashi his claws. "That's not all either," he said quietly through clenched teeth. "I almost went after Iruka and Asuma this morning thanks to some unexpected urges." Killing urges. Kakashi's eye widened as he realized what had happened to the boy. "Naruto, I swear if I had known that would have happened I would have warned you so you could dispel your clones." Naruto nodded. "I know, that is why I'm going easy on you. But you will be punished." Kakashi nodded and waited as Naruto stood up and released him from the ninja wire. Half an hour later and all four of them stood up and ready. "Okay team, here is your test," Kakashi said, holding up 2 silver bells. "You need to get these 2 bells from me before lunch or you all go back to the academy and fail the test." Hinata frowned and looked at him. "But sensei, there are only 2 bells." Kakashi nodded. "Correct. So whoever doesn't get one goes back to the academy." Naruto smiled and nodded. He knew all about this test. It was his father's test and his sensei's before him. Kakashi tied the bells to his side and walked over to the clock, turning it on, and then faced the 3 genin. "Oh, and you had better come at me with intent to kill or you will never get a bell. Begin." At that all 3 of them disappeared and Kakashi widened his eye as he looked around. Wonder what Naruto will plan for them, he thought as he pulled out an orange book and began to read while giggling perversely. Hidden in the trees watching their sensei, the team members sat planning what to do. "Okay guys, that's my plan, what do you think?" Naruto said as he looked at them. Hinata was nodding and Sasuke had a thoughtful expression. "What about the 2 bells though? Who is going to be going back to the academy?" Naruto smiled. "Leave that to me," he said as he looked back at where Kakashi stood or to where the 2 bells were. He doesn't know. I know about the secret bell hidden by a genjutsu," he thought as he looked at his team. "Well?" Sasuke and Hinata nodded. "Good, then let's begin," he said, releasing the buttons on his sleeves. Kakashi stood in the clearing, his one eye scanning for any sign. Maybe they're better than I thought," he said to himself as he felt movement behind him. Moving his head slightly, he dodged a set of kunai that was thrown at him and then another. Then again, maybe not. Naruto stood in a tree watching and waiting as Hinata and Sasuke threw kunais at their sensei. Unbeknownst to the Jonin, Naruto had placed a barrier seal right behind him and his two teammates were now forcing him to move right to it. But right before he stepped into the seal he disappeared and reappeared on the other side, his book away and his eyes on the seal. Clever Naruto. Have them lead me into a barrier seal that traps me and then come in when you are good and ready. But not clever enough, he thought before he suddenly widened his one eye as golden chains erupted around him from the ground and wrapped themselves around him. Crap, can't do a replacement or shunshin. What are these made of? For an answer Naruto suddenly appeared in front of him, his arm outstretched as chains sprouted from his shirt sleeve. Naruto smiled and held out his other hand, which to Kakashi's surprise was holding 3 silver bells. Hinata and Sasuke jumped down next to him and stared in surprise at the third bell. Before they could ask, Naruto explained. There was a third bell hidden in a genjutsu. He wanted us to fight against each other. Instead he fell into our trap. Kakashi smiled at the boy as he threw each of his teammates a bell and released him from the chains. Hee. Well done, Naruto. You knew I would see the seal and placed those chains under the ground around it, knowing I would jump over the seal at one point. Naruto nodded and smiled. Yeah, but that was only the first idea. We had 2 backup plans in case you dodged that one. Kakashi smiled and nodded. Well, good, then I can happily say, you pass. The 3 teens smiled and Kakashi looked at them. How about I treat you to barbecue? A celebratory dinner. The other went to nod when Naruto spoke up. Actually Kakashi, I think we need to go see Gigi. Kakashi looked at him and saw that Naruto suddenly looked fearful. He realized why and frowned. Are you sure, Naruto? You don't have to. Naruto nodded and looked at his friends. Yeah, I do, he said. Kakashi sighed and nodded. Turning to the other 2 teens who looked confused, he spoke up. Okay, then first thing first, the Hokage's office. Then we eat. They nodded and started to walk away, both looking at the blonde boy wondering what he needed to tell them. Naruto sighed as he stood before the door to the Hokage's office. Then taking a deep breath he knocked and heard a greeting from inside. Naruto and his team entered the office of the village leader and Naruto was shocked to see not only Sume, but Hana sitting there as well. Both looked at him in surprise and Naruto turned and bowed to the Hokage. My apologies, Hokage Domo, we will wait outside. Hiruzen stared in shock. Naruto never spoke to him in such a way, and that meant that whatever he was here for was important. No, I was done anyway, Namikaze-sama, he said. He looked at the 2 women. I believe you can handle matters from here. They nodded and stood up to leave. Hana stopped and looked at him. Naruto looked at her and nodded. I will be by later. I promise, but right now. He trailed off and looked at his team. It's time for some truth. Hana's eyes widened and she placed a hand on his shoulder. We have a wide variety of sake if you need some, she said as she left. Naruto got the message hidden there. If he need comfort after this, it was available at the Inuzuka compound. Naruto nodded and walked into the Hokage's office with his team once more. Sarutobi looked at them and then sighed. What is going on, Naruto-kun? Naruto looked at him and then took a deep breath. Hokage Domo, with your permission I would speak in Sasuke Uchiha and Hinata Hyuga to order 5578. Sarutobi's eyes widened in surprise as he heard this and his mouth fell open. He struggled to find words. Naruto, are you sure about this? He said, casting fearful glances at the 2 other members of his team. You don't have to. Naruto sighed and looked at them before looking at the Hokage. Actually, Hokage Domo, I do. Sarutobi sighed and sat back looking at his adoptive grandson before nodding. Very well, Naruto-kun, and thank you for coming here, he said as he motioned for his Anbu guard to leave aside from one with purple hair and a sword that Naruto instantly recognized, and activating his security seals. Naruto sighed and turned to his teammates. You better sit down, this will take a while, he said. 1 hour later. Naruto stared at his teammates, fear evident in his face as they processed everything he had told them. Sasuke sat staring at the floor, a thoughtful look on his face. Hinata looked at him, her brow creased in thought as well. She was the first to speak. Can you show us this other form you have? Naruto nodded and without even trying shifted to his demon form. Hinata stared at him for a long moment before suddenly he was engulfed in a hug after hearing a sudden scream of kawaii. He felt Hinata reach up and pet his ears, which he noticed were now on top of his head and even more fox-like than before. As she did this, he looked at Sasuke to see him smiling at him. I have known you for almost 5 years now. You are my brother in all but blood. This changes nothing. It just proves that I was right to choose you to help me. Naruto smiled and felt tears come to his eyes as his two greatest friends in the world accepted him for what the rest of the village scorned him for. Thank you. Naruto smiled at his friends and then looked at the man he considered a grandfather. Thanks for letting me do this, Gigi. The old man smiled at him and nodded his head. You are welcome, Naruto-kun. Now indulge your old Gigi's curiosity for a moment. I am going to assume that due to the way Hinata is holding you that you two are an item now? He asked with a smirk on his face. Hinata, who had been petting Naruto's tails at the time, heard this and suddenly blushed and backed away. W. Well, ID. Don't K. Know about T. That. She looked down and gasped as she felt a pair of arms wrap around her and looked to see Naruto standing there smiling at her. What's wrong, Toyotamahime? I don't like seeing you upset. His words had an instant effect on Hinata as her eyes rolled back into her head and she slumped into his arms. Sasuke groaned and pinched the bridge of his nose. Really, Dobi, you can't go a day without either making her blush or making her faint, can you? Naruto smiled and picked his crush up as he sat in a chair. Why would I when it makes her look even cuter? Sarutobi and Kakashi both chuckled at that. Naruto smiled and looked at Hinata. His thoughts started to drift to the 4 other women when he was interrupted by his occupant. Hey kid, I think I figured out a way to fix your problem. Naruto stiffened and gasped. The other occupants looked at him but he wasn't paying attention. Unconsciously he answered Kurama out loud. What do you mean, Kurama-san? How can I fix it? Kurama sat within his clearing and was looking down at a large tome on the ground. I summoned a tome from within my own inner realm and did some checking and found something I had forgotten about kitsunes. Naruto growled. Well, spill it out, fuzz ass, or I'm coming in there. Kurama chuckled. Patience, kid, I'm getting there. He looked back down at the tome. You see, like normal foxes, kitsunes mate for life. But unlike them, there are strict laws about mating. For instance, if a female already has a mate and another male claims her, then the original male may challenge the offender for her. Naruto's eyes widened. So that means that so long as they have a boyfriend or husband, if I lose in a fight against them, I am free of any bond with them? Kurama nodded. Correct. But you have to actually fight back. Your fox half won't let you fake the fight. Naruto nodded and smiled even more, unconsciously holding Hinata closer to him. Thank you, Kurama. You have just saved me from a great burden. Sarutobi decided that now was a good time to interrupt. Naruto cared to share this knowledge with us and tell me what burden you were talking about. He asked, even though he guessed at the burden after his conversation with Hana. Naruto smiled and looked at him. Well, you see, last night there was an... He stopped and looked down, a large blush on his face. Incident with me and the Ice Queens. He saw Sarutobi give a perverted smirk along with Kakashi. Naruto swore to prank both of them for that. And now I am stuck with all 4 of them as my unwanted mates. He hissed the last part out. Sarutobi nodded, already knowing most of that. And the Kyuubi has found a solution for this? Naruto nodded. Yeah. It seems that if I fight the girls' men and lose, they will not be my mates anymore. The old man nodded at this and sat back. Naruto, before you go through with this, I think you ought to talk to Hana and Sume. You may want to hear what they have to say. Naruto looked at him, his eyes suddenly becoming untrusting. Is this a way for other to manipulate me? Sarutobi shook his head. No, Naruto-kun. I would never allow that. This is just something that has to do with being a ninja clan head. I can't tell you any more because that is not my right. Only they can. Naruto nodded and sighed. Guess that's fair. He looked down at Hinata and smiled, then looked at Kakashi. So is dinner still up for free? Naruto smiled at his friends as he sat down inside of the BBQ place. Hinata was sitting at his side with a blush evident on her face, but she also carried a small smile due to the fact that under the table Naruto had taken hold of one of her hands. Kakashi across from them smiled and then sat back and looked at Naruto. Okay, Naruto, I must admit you surprised me today. Your planning and strategy was superb. In fact, you are probably the first team to ever get the bells in the first place. The bell test is the hardest and most challenging of the secondary tests there is, yet you 3 just blew through it like nothing. Naruto chuckled at that. Well, we have been training for a week before getting assigned teams. Kakashi nodded. So aside from your mom's chakra chains, do you have any other Kekkei Genkai? Naruto smiled and sat back, Hinata's hand still in his as she moved closer and lay her head on his shoulder hesitantly. Naruto smiled at her and then looked at Kakashi. Actually yes. Kakashi nodded. Care to share? Naruto looked up and began to think. Well, to begin. Flashback. Naruto sat at Shi library desk once again going over his clan's Kekkei Genkai abilities. Kurama, I find it hard to believe that I will have all of these abilities. Isn't there some way to find out which specific ones I will have? Kurama sitting in the clearing looked up and frowned. Actually there might. I will need to go through your DNA though. Do you mind? Naruto shook his head. No, go ahead. I'd trust you. Kurama nodded and then sat down in a meditative pose with his hands together in the rat or nay hand sign. With a growl, Kurama sent a trendle of chakra right into the ground and closed his eyes as he began to read Naruto's very DNA. Naruto sat at his desk waiting. He began to wonder if everything was going okay when Kurama spoke. Found it, Kit. Okay, here we go. Better write this down so you can research it later. Naruto nodded and grabbed a small notepad and pen and waited. Okay, aside from your chakra chains and sensory, you also have cyclone release as well as the ability to manipulate seals using your blood. Naruto wrote this down and then waited for him to continue. I also sense another elemental ability, but it is unknown to me. Naruto frowned and prepared his pen. Describe it and I will look it up. If it doesn't have a name, I can name it. Kurama nodded, his eyes still closed. It is a combination of wind, fire and lightning elements and allows you to, It seems it allows you to create a form of energy that can be manipulated and shaped like your chakra can. Kurama opened his eyes. That's all you got, kid? Sorry, you won't get any of the other abilities from them. Naruto nodded. That's fine. This is enough. Kurama nodded but suddenly had an idea. Hey kid. Yeah, I want to give you a Kekkei Genkai. Naruto froze in his writing. What? Kurama nodded. I want to give you a Kekkei Genkai that will be unique to you and you alone. Naruto frowned. What kind of Kekkei Genkai? A dojutsu. Naruto gasped. You mean like Tomi's Sharingan or Hinata's Byakugan? Kurama nodded. Yes. Naruto shook his head. Okay, describe what you want to give me and I will then make a decision. Kurama nodded. Fair enough. The technique would be called Kitsune no Bijin or Fox Vision. It will allow you to see through and cast genjutsus through your eyes. Now this is similar to what the Sharingan can do, but there are two differences. One, this technique is linked to the Kitsune clan and as such the genjutsus will be extremely strong, and two, you don't need to look your enemy in the eye to cast the genjutsu. Naruto nodded and wrote the info down. Now it also allows you another ability called Kitsune-Kiubbi. This technique will allow you to enter your enemy's mind and control their movements. Naruto nodded at that as well. Are there any drawbacks? Kurama smiled and nodded. Yes. First, Kitsune-Kiubbi can only be used once a day. Because unlike the Nara's shadow possession or the Yamanaka's mind transfer, it is a true possession ability, something the more darker kitsunes use regularly. Naruto nodded again and waited. The other drawback is that if you use it for more than half an hour at a time, you will go blind for a short period of time. Continue to do this and will be permanently blind. Naruto nodded and sat back and looked up at the ceiling. Okay, I will take it. Kurama smiled. Then hang on kid, because this will hurt. His smile turned into a wicked grin. Like a bitch. Naruto didn't even get a chance to respond before he was enveloped by massive pain. Flashback end. Naruto looked at his companions and shrugged. That's about everything. But now that I'm a well, you know, he said looking around the room. I may have gained some new abilities. Kurama-san is looking into that to tell me later. Kakashi nodded and looked at him. Did you ever name that advanced elemental Kekkei Genkai? Naruto nodded and smiled. Yeah, I'm calling it energy release. I haven't gotten a good hang of it yet, but it lets me literally create pure energy that can be solidified or warped however I want. Kakashi nodded. That is an impressive ability, Naruto. Naruto nodded and rubbed the back of his head. Thanks, sensei. He smiled and then spotted a clock and sighed. Looks like it's time for me to go talk to Sume-san and Hana-san. He felt Hinata clutch his hand harder before she let it go and sat up. Naruto smiled at her before standing up. I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a good night, Toyota Mahaim, he said before walking away. Sasuke had to jump forward to catch Hinata as she once again passed out at Naruto's words. He sighed and shook his head as he laid her down on the booth. He enjoys doing that too much. Kakashi chuckled and sat back as he watched his sensei's son walk off. Naruto sighed and looked at the building that was the Inuzuka clan's home. The main house was not large by any means. It reminded Naruto of those ranch buildings he had seen in magazines. All the other buildings were exactly the same and the entire building was surrounded by open grass. Taking a deep breath, Naruto walked through the gates and up to the front door. Raising his hand, he knocked on the door and then stepped back to wait. He didn't wait long. Naruto watched the door opened and then saw one of his few friends from school standing there. "Oh hey Naruto, what are you doing here?" Naruto smiled at him and rubbed the back of his head. "Oh hey Kiba, I'm here to talk to your mom and sister actually." Kiba raised an eyebrow at that and crossed his arms. "And why is that?" Naruto shrugged. "Clan head business." Kiba narrowed his eyes but moved aside. "Don't try anything funny Naruto, I am watching you." Naruto nodded but under his breath mumbled, "It's not me you should be worried about." Kiba led Naruto through the house until they reached what looked like a sitting room for the family. "Hey Mom, Hana, you two got a guest." He then turned and walked out. Naruto sighed and looked up as both Hana and Sume walked into the room. They stopped and looked at him as he stood there. "Hey," he said quietly as the two women continued to stare at him. Finally someone moved as Sume smiled and motioned towards the couch. "Sit down Naruto and we will discuss what's going on." Naruto nodded and took a seat on the couch. Hana sat down next to him as Sume sat across from both of them. "Okay Naruto, how much do you know about clan laws here in Konoha?" she asked. Naruto shook his head and looked down. "Little to nothing. I was just a civilian, remember? All the clan stuff is still new to me." Sume nodded. "Okay then let me fill you in on some things." She sat back and looked at him. "First, it isn't common knowledge but all the clans are in a way divided." Naruto looked at her and nodded for her to continue. "There is roughly a three-way split between the clans. You have the Yamanakas, the Naras, and the Akamichis who have been working together for years. Then there is us, the Inuzuka, the Abumas, and the Sarutobis. Then you have the Hyugas and Uchihas." Naruto nodded at her saying that he was still listening. "Now among those groups there are those who are also allies with other clans. Such as us, we are allies with the Nara clan and the Hyuga clan. So in essence the divide doesn't exist. But it is mostly a political split." Naruto's eyes widened as he suddenly realized what that meant. "I see now. Should one of the clans suggest something, the other clans allied with that clan will back its decision." Sume nodded. "Correct. Now we have the clan laws. You see, each clan is in essence the pillars that hold a ninja community together. So the village has laws to control and protect the clans." She closed her eyes and opened them again. "These laws are one of the reasons you are her Naruto. You see, among the village there is a law called the Clan Restoration Act, or CRA as it is called. This law states that the last male surviving member of a clan must take at least 5 wives to recreate their clan." Naruto's eyes widened and then narrowed. Sume watched this but continued. "Now this is normally a law that is only activated once the said male has come of age, but it can be fought if you are supported by other clans." Naruto's eyes opened wide. "Wait, so if I am allied with other clans they could help me get this law off my back?" Sume nodded, not surprised that Naruto understood quickly. "Then that should be easy. I'm friends with 5 of the clan heirs currently." Sume's eyes opened wide at the boy's words. He's right, she thought, with those friends he has instant alliance with all of those clans. And since both the Hyuga and Uchiha heir are his teammates, he already has one of the groups on his side. She looked at him and nodded. "You're right Naruto, but remember they are clan heirs, not the leader yet. You need to ally yourself with their parents as well." Naruto smiled. "That shouldn't be hard. Hiyashi-sama has been helping me learn taijutsu, and Shikaku-san regularly invites me over for a game of shogi or go." Sume blinked and surprised and smiled. "Do you ever not surprise Naruto?" Naruto chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. "Nope, that's my specialty." Sume nodded and sat back before glancing at her daughter and giving a slight nod. Hana took a deep breath and then looked at Naruto. "Naruto." He turned and looked at her. "Yes Hana-san?" Hana took a deep breath and looked down. "Naruto, among the clans there are also laws within the clans that we have to follow. Naruto nodded, this much he knew. He had read up everything he could on both his birth clans and learned their laws so as to follow them and possibly recreate them later. Hana bit her bottom lip as her cheeks started to turn red. Among our clan we have a law in regards to marriage and mating. Naruto froze his thoughts, suddenly turning to Sarutobi, warning him before doing something to come talk to these girls. I think I'm about to find out why he said that. Agreed, said Kurama from within his mind. Hana took another deep breath and looked at Naruto. Naruto, my clan's law is that once we mate with someone we are married to that person. In other words, as of the other night you are now my husband. That's all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.